Our story begins with a hard truth. Everyone who tried to hoard supplies and hide in residential villas was dead wrong. Only he, having been reborn, knows exactly where the best place is for the dogs to survive. Suddenly, we find him in a room. He sat up with a jolt, but the seatbelt yanked him back forcefully into the seat. He was gasping desperately for air, with one hand pressed firmly against the horn. His other hand instinctively covered his neck, as if protecting something precious. The sharp pain of the seatbelt tightening against him was all too physical. It continued to gnaw at his nerves, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just the belt causing that sensation. It was something far more painful, a zombie. The memory of the zombie's bite felt far too real to be a mere trick of the mind. How could it have been so vivid? He let go of the horn, and the piercing sound finally stopped. A dream couldn't possibly be that realistic, could it? He checked the time, June 20th, 1:58 in the afternoon. He remembers it perfectly. In the dream, the outbreak began on June 27th, and he was bitten on the 25th. September 25th, to be precise. Everything that happened in those 3 months is etched into his memory. After all, what kind of dream has a clear beginning and end while lasting for 3 whole months? But the most important thing is that he can recall every single detail with absolute clarity. He looked up and saw the construction site of the industrial warehouse he is currently remodeling. The heat was unbearable. If what he just experienced wasn't a dream, then in 5 minutes, something will happen. The client, who usually never reaches out, will call to say the payment for the work has been authorized, and he will also ask to switch to the night shift to avoid this stifling heat. So now, all he has to do is wait 5 minutes in silence to confirm if any of it was real. We can safely say those were the longest 5 minutes of his entire life. The powerful air conditioning of his tank DMP seemed to have stopped working at that very moment. Thick beads of sweat began to break out from his hair and across his skin. The t-shirt he was wearing felt completely soaked through. He had no doubt that if the seat ventilation hadn't stayed on, he would have wet himself from pure terror. When the clock finally struck 2:03 in the afternoon, he felt as if a massive weight had been lifted. Damn it all, he told himself there was no more reason to be scared over nothing. He wiped away the sweat and grabbed his phone to start watching some videos. Suddenly, the phone screen lit up. It was a call from the client, and he answered it almost out of pure habit. He tried to calm his racing heart and began to think about what to do next. In any case, the absolute priority now is survival. And since he had already lived through a trial version, however brief, he had learned quite a few things. The most crucial part is that his memories of those 3 months are extraordinarily vivid. Without a doubt, they will serve as an essential guide for his survival. He started the car and headed home, knowing the first step is to establish a secure base of operations. His wife happened to be on her day off and was waiting at home. When he arrived, he found her in the bedroom watching The Walking Dead. How ironic. To be honest, she won't be needing that show anymore. In just 6 more days, she would be able to live the experience for herself. He spent the next 40 minutes trying to prove to his wife that he wasn't crazy and, more importantly, that he wasn't looking for a divorce. In the end, his wife told him she didn't want him staying home, fully convinced he was simply playing a prank on her. Who on earth would make up such elaborate stories just for a joke? He argued that while screenwriters invent stories for a living, he certainly wasn't the type to weave tales just to deceive her. Reminding her that she was the one who won him over with stories, he pointed out it was now 3:30 in the afternoon. He predicted that at exactly 4 o'clock, her mother would give her a call. She would tell her that the kitchen faucet had broken and that water was spraying everywhere. She told him not to talk nonsense, as her mother was always at the shop in the afternoons. However, he knew the power had gone out there today, forcing her to return home early. Suddenly, his wife's phone began to ring. It was his mother-in-law calling. He gestured for her to answer it, watching her closely. Hesitant, she took the call, and he reached over to switch on the speakerphone, just to be sure. When her mother said she was already home, his wife's eyes widened in complete shock. The mother invited her and Yang Wang over for dinner that evening, just as he might have expected. Utterly confused, his wife hung up the phone and stood there for a moment. She stared at him, simply not knowing what to think anymore. She asked him if he had somehow known in advance that the power would go out at the shop. He told her that if she still didn't believe him, she shouldn't worry just yet, because in exactly 30 minutes, her mother would be calling her once again. The call would be to check if the water faucet was indeed broken. Without any rush, he opened his computer and logged into Shio, searching for contingency plans to learn from others' experiences. Meanwhile, we see his wife beginning to wait for the call, growing more restless by the second. As soon as 4 o'clock passed, his mother-in-law's call arrived right on time, to the very minute. His wife answered, and upon hanging up, she stared at him and admitted that everything he had said was true. He told her she could call it a dream, and in that dream, he had seen it all. Terrified, she asked what had happened to her parents and her sister in that other life. He revealed that his own mother had died at the mahjong parlor on the very day the chaos erupted. As for her sister, she had been left behind on the 14th day. Her father and mother, however, had managed to hold out at home until day 55. When she asked about herself, he explained that she had remained hidden away at home. He had gone out to search for food, and that was when he was bitten. But this time, he was determined to ensure that their entire family would be safe. Upon arriving at his mother-in-law's house, he set to work and replaced the broken water faucet. He also took the opportunity to convince his mother-in-law and his father-in-law, who had just arrived. Now, we return to the present, where they can finally begin planning how to survive the coming apocalypse. His wife suggested that the safest place would obviously be their bank's vault. It was incredibly sturdy, reinforced with 6 massive steel plates. No one could possibly get in, but his wife's imagination often drifted to such peculiar places. He couldn't help but chuckle, knowing that a vault is useless for anything other than being strong. It doesn't even have water, and if they lock themselves in there, they'll run out of resources almost immediately. What Yang Wang is trying to explain is that this crisis won't even be over by the end of September. He asked her, quite reasonably, just how many supplies she actually planned to fit in such a small space. To make matters worse, he added that by the 10th day, both the water and the electricity would be cut off. In a vault like that, they wouldn't even have enough air to breathe, which is a rather vital requirement for survival. His mother-in-law then emerged from the kitchen with a plate, urging them all to eat some fruit. She looked at him and noted that since Yang Wang had already lived through this, he was the expert. They begged him to tell them what to do, and Yang Wang knew the weight of that responsibility was now his. He realized he would have to use every bit of his mental capacity to plan his family's survival in just 1 week. Surviving the apocalypse, as we often see in these stories, depends entirely on the right timing. It requires the right location and, perhaps most difficult of all, the cooperation of other people. At this very moment, time was clearly on his side, a luxury few others would ever have. He had 7 more days than everyone else to prepare, though he had already wasted half a day. Regarding the location, he spent the afternoon reviewing over 100 survival forum articles, most of which shared the same idea. The general consensus was to lock oneself at home and scrape by however possible. And thinking it over, he realized that plan actually made a great deal of sense. Most city dwellers are soft, to be honest, and have no idea where their food even comes from. Perhaps some of them are fit enough to run a half marathon if the situation calls for it. Others might be able to squat 60 kilos at the gym without breaking a sweat. But when facing the complex demands of an apocalypse, they all have massive weaknesses and almost no real strengths. Besides, most people simply don't have the guts to go out and fight for their survival. So, naturally, their only real option is to lock themselves in and scrape by as best they can. This strategy of hiding away and surviving on crumbs has 2 main components, namely, fortifying one's position and barely managing to stay alive. On the internet, the idea of fortifying is divided into 2 schools of thought: high-rise apartments or independent villas. The villa school is further split between those in gated communities and those out in the countryside. But of course, in the end, no matter which you choose, they are still just residences with all the inherent problems of a home. And here we see disadvantage number 1 of trying to fortify a standard house. The space is cramped, and the number of people who can actually live there is quite limited. An apartment rarely exceeds 300 square meters, and even a villa usually tops out at 500. In the long term, you can really only support 3 to 5 people in such a space. The need for supplies and the space available to store them are, unfortunately, inversely proportional. The more people you have, the less relative space there is for the supplies they need to survive. In one of the articles he read, they even described an incredible scenario where a family of 7 lived in a tiny house, staying barricaded inside without ever leaving for 2 whole years, which sounds like a nightmare, to be honest. The second major issue is a distinct lack of self-sufficiency. Modern homes are almost entirely dependent on a vast array of public utility services. They only function with external support, which is the first thing to go in a crisis. If the water or electricity is cut off, the quality of life doesn't just drop, it plummets. It can even make the home unbearable to live in, or, worse yet, reveal your location to others. For instance, in a high-rise, if the water is cut and you flush the toilet, that sound will betray your presence and suggest you have plenty of supplies. Thirdly, the defense is weak. He had read articles suggesting replacing glass with bulletproof panes or installing high-resistance security doors. There are young people out there who have actually seen how easily a window or door frame can be dismantled. To be honest, he had done things much crazier than that himself. And then there are those who believe a simple doorstop can completely seal a heavy-duty fire door. Let's think about that for a moment, a fire door. Did they seriously believe those makeshift solutions were actually that resistant? The fourth issue we see is that the structural integrity is often quite poor. In a high-rise, you might get away with it, but villas have the added complication of a patio. What is the plan there? To install a glass roof, perhaps? If not, what happens when zombies scale the fence? Would that glass roof even hold the weight of those falling from above? Could it really resist the determined attack of someone with truly bad intentions? Fifth, the storage capacity in these homes is, frankly, abysmal. And it isn't just a matter of having the physical space available. You also need the proper facilities and access to actually transport all those goods. He saw that one author had purchased 300 sacks of rice and another 300 of flour. But having to haul 20,000 units up to a high floor is where the plan falls apart. Yes, you might have a vehicle and supplies, but how much weight can the elevator actually handle? Can you even fit a full pallet inside, and will the floor of the apartment hold it? How much weight can it support, and just how high can you safely pile everything up? Imagine having to haul 300 heavy sacks of rice all by yourself. If you actually possess that kind of strength, one has to wonder, why stop there? Why wouldn't you just go out and fight the zombies instead? And then we have the sixth problem. The capacity to generate one's own power is often dangerously limited. To prepare for the inevitable blackouts, many people realize how vital solar energy and water purification truly are. However, many simply buy 10 square meters of solar panels and a 10 kilowatt-hour battery, expecting to run a water purifier, a refrigerator, a television, an electric blanket, a fan, and a dozen other appliances all at once. It makes no sense whatsoever. Have they even bothered to calculate the total power they actually need? Seventh, the plan for waste management is almost non-existent. Every article he had read completely ignored the issue of packaging, as if it simply didn't exist. But what about the actual trash and the sewage? How do you handle that? An average person produces 2 kilograms of waste every single day. A family of 3 to 5 people would be buried in their own home within 6 months. His wife and her parents surrounded him, their faces etched with a growing sense of desperation. They asked if he had just come up with this, but he had been reliving these nightmares for 3 months. He already had a place in mind. He had already chosen the perfect location. He smiled at his wife, noting that first, they had to define exactly who would be on the team. He and his wife had previously decided not to have any children. Her parents were still alive and in good health. His father had already passed away, but his mother lived there with them. We see that the family includes a 3-year-old black Labrador. His in-laws, for their part, have a large orange cat, and his wife has a younger sister who is currently working as a resident doctor at the provincial hospital in the neighboring state. So, the group consists of 5 people, 1 cat, and 1 dog. His father-in-law had run his own business years ago. He knows how to repair machinery. He is a licensed electrician, and he can even drive heavy trucks. The protagonist himself knows carpentry, masonry, and welding. If it comes down to building a simple shelter, he and his father-in-law can certainly handle it. As long as the others lend a hand, he is confident they can get the shelter standing. First, he tells his wife to make sure her sister comes back home, and if she has a boyfriend, she should bring him along as well. But where on earth does he plan for them to take refuge? His name is Sunshine. He is the owner of a small remodeling company. To be perfectly honest, he never would have imagined it. That one day, the very job that puts food on his table would become the skill that saves his life. And now, he must use that skill to protect his entire family. He has to use this ability to keep them safe in an apocalypse plagued by zombies. It is June 20th at 6:40 in the evening. Apocalyptic Survival, the team's very first planning meeting. They gather in his in-law's living room. The attendees include his father-in-law, his mother-in-law, his wife, and himself. We see 7 blueprints spread across the floor, held down at the corners by shoes, glasses, and even the cat and dog to keep them from rolling up. His wife takes diligent notes on the meeting right there in their home. While she writes, images of the building's interior and exterior are projected on the television, and a 3D model of the construction is displayed on the laptop. Using a pair of chopsticks as a makeshift pointer, Sunshine begins his explanation. The objective is this building, or rather, this fortress. It is located on the southeast corner of a major intersection. Its construction originally began back in 2014. It is a frame structure built from reinforced concrete poured in a single, solid piece. The building stands 5 stories high, equipped with 2 freight elevators and 2 spiral staircases. Each floor covers 830 square meters, and the roof features a walkable terrace of 640 square meters. Its original purpose was to serve as a cold storage warehouse and office space. During its construction, the builders applied lessons learned from the Great 2008 earthquake, intentionally reinforcing the entire structure. The walls and floors are 20% thicker than those of a standard cold storage facility. This building boasts excellent seismic and impact resistance, along with superior thermal and acoustic insulation. As he points to the screen to explain this to the family, his father-in-law asks if the cold storage section was ever actually finished. His father-in-law is a sharp man, and he immediately grasps the key issue. If it were finished, they wouldn't have to worry about the building's integrity at all. However, ventilation in a sealed cold storage warehouse would be a problem, much like it was in the vault for Bao Bao and the others. Furthermore, using fire inside a warehouse like that would be extremely dangerous. As it turns out, it isn't finished. In 2016, only the main structure and the water and electrical installations were completed. But the building inspection took 2 years to be approved because, as it turns out, it is actually an illegal construction. It isn't finished. In 2016, the main structure and the water and electrical installations were completed, but the building inspection took 2 years to be approved because, in reality, it is an illegal construction. It isn't finished. In 2016, the main structure and utilities were completed, but the inspection took 2 years because, to be honest, it's an illegal construction. It is not finished. In 2016, the main structure and the water and electrical installations were completed, but the building inspection took 2 years to be approved because, in reality, it is an illegal construction. It isn't finished. In 2016, the main structure and the water and electrical installations were completed, but the building inspection took 2 years to be approved because, in reality, it is an illegal construction. It isn't finished. In 2016, the main structure and the water and electrical installations were completed, but the building inspection took 2 years to be approved because, as we see, it is actually an illegal construction. The building's design provides for an annual generation of 300 megawatts. Of course, in practice, things are rarely that ideal. And with the weather becoming increasingly extreme and abnormal, he calculates that if they reach 20% of that capacity, they can consider themselves lucky. He spreads his hands. And 20%, how much energy is that exactly? 60 megawatts. Discounting transmission losses and panel degradation, it comes to approximately. That leaves us with 40,000 kilowatt hours. And if we apply another 70% discount, we are still left with 12,000 kilowatt hours. His father-in-law calculated that more than 30 kilowatt hours a day would be more than enough. So, our only real problem is storage, but he believes that won't be too difficult to manage. We see they have a small showroom right in front of the building. The day after tomorrow, they are scheduled to deliver 5 sets of blade car batteries, and along with those, 10 additional blade battery modules. In total, we will be able to store 950 kilowatt hours. But if we have enough storage, what exactly would the power output be? The car battery packs can provide 6 kilowatts each. The battery modules, on the other hand, provide 1 kilowatt. They can be used in groups, allowing them to be charged and discharged in turns. Everyone nodded in agreement. One could say they all breathed a collective sigh of relief. At last, they finally had a reliable source of electricity. They had the energy and a way to store it. Now, the question was how to actually use it. The entire building is designed for 400 kilowatts, with each floor allocated 100. In theory, of course, that should be more than enough for their needs. But he scratched his head, realizing it was practically impossible for them to use it all. The pre-installed electrical system includes power for machinery, lighting, and low-voltage circuits. The reason for his concern is quite simple: the noise and the inevitable deterioration. The main concerns were the noise and the equipment's deterioration, so he changed the display to an aerial view of the factory. We see the fortress's transformer, which was built according to national regulations. It is located in a clear area near the perimeter fence, right next to the electrical control room. Furthermore, since this is an industrial warehouse, all the lamps are high power and explosion-proof. And yes, they provide a massive amount of light, but they also consume a massive amount of electricity. To make matters worse, these lamps even have their own dedicated cooling systems. So, if they use the current electrical system, they'll have to deal with the noise of the transformer, the lamps, and constant wear and tear. That noise, as we can imagine, would inevitably attract both zombies and other desperate people. And if the equipment breaks down, well, they certainly don't have the capacity to repair it themselves. His father-in-law stood there, lost in thought for a moment. He suggested that if they have enough capacity to generate and store energy, they should simply build their own electrical system. Could they really generate all that energy using only the solar panels? With a specialized arrangement and the right software to manage the output, they could push the efficiency to its absolute limit. And once they could control the timing of the cleaning cycles, the entire display would be far more manageable. He suggested a specific setup so they could understand, aesthetically speaking, what the ultimate goal of the installation would be. It was more than just a solution. It was a complete reinforcement of their power grid. One has to be careful with these things. After all, they are certainly being bold in how they accumulate power. A combination of 2 plus 2, with 1 held in reserve. As long as they control simultaneous consumption so it doesn't exceed 10 kilowatts, the power supply will remain safe and stable. And with that, the problem of electricity is finally resolved. Or so they hope. Next on the list is the water. This problem must be divided into 3 parts: collection, storage, and drainage. First, we must consider the collection and the storage. Both water and electricity were cut off just 10 days after the initial outbreak. As he explained the project once more, he felt completely in his element, like a fish in water. 13 days passed from the moment the water stopped until the heavy rains finally began. After 7 days of intense rain, they faced a long period of 46 days without a single drop. In other words, they need to store enough water to last at least 60 days. Considering the family's current consumption, they would need a staggering 43 tons of water. It is a truly exaggerated figure, not to mention the sheer size a 40-ton tank would require. The floor probably wouldn't be able to support that kind of weight, would it? So, they have to do everything possible to save water and use it in stages. And of course, recycle it. He told the 2 women, mother and daughter, to think it over tonight. They needed to find ways to save water during their daily routines. His father-in-law gave the final order, and his wife nodded obediently. He realized that if he had been the one to ask, she likely would have ignored him entirely. Inside the building, we see 2 5-ton tanks already in place. They used to require a great deal of purified water for their production lines. The water purification equipment has plenty of capacity, but it's located on the first floor. He plans to remove some parts and hide them in the cold room to make the equipment look broken. He took a sip of water, remembering that a few days ago, he found a well in the south garden. It is a pump well, and fortunately, it comes with the piping already pre-installed. The water outlet is hidden inside the well, and there is an opening conveniently located on the second floor. By installing a small 50-meter Yangqing pump, we can easily draw the water out. Most likely, the previous company wanted to use groundwater in secret to cool their equipment. A clever trick, really. He managed to get his hands on the test blueprints and carefully marked the location of all the pipes. His plan is to completely seal the pipe shaft on the first and second floors and extend the piping all the way to the fourth. As for the water itself, they will use this purified supply, which means they need a separate purification system. He also needs to install ultraviolet disinfection lamps in the 2 water tanks to sterilize the water at any given moment. And finally, we come to the matter of waste drainage. This, to be perfectly honest, is a truly massive problem. A single person produces about 2 kilograms of waste per day. It is a reality that simply cannot be ignored. Solid and liquid waste must be separated from the general water supply. For bodily waste, they will use a portable rolling hunting toilet equipped with biodegradable liquid. They will have twice the usual number of black water tanks and empty them all at once whenever it is safe to do so. The sewage pipe will only be used inside the sealed shaft, utilizing a pipe from the other side to keep everything dry. He gave the dog a little nudge with his foot to move him, as the pup's backside was right over the pipe shaft. Domestic wastewater is divided into 2 distinct categories. Since some of it contains oil, it will be collected in a tank and filtered through an oil-water separator. The remaining water and other types of sewage will be collected and disposed of together. On rainy days, they will secretly discharge it all into the municipal drainage system. He tossed the little dog a treat to keep him quiet and calm. The key to getting rid of waste is stealth and silence throughout the process, along with saving as much water as possible. This, combined with the reuse of water, will reduce the amount of waste they need to dispose of to an absolute minimum. By recycling what they can, they significantly lower the risk of being discovered, which is, of course, the entire point. His father-in-law, being a very cautious man, asked if the 2 drainage pipes were connected to one another. He explained that they aren't. Even the septic tank has 2 separate compartments to keep things isolated. Therefore, when they seal the mouth of the well, they must fill it with expanding foam to ensure a perfect fit. They have to find a way to prevent the sound of running water from echoing inside the shaft. It seems his father-in-law really does think of everything, a useful trait in these circumstances. He truly does. Every single detail is being accounted for, one by one. And just then, his mother arrived home. We see her walking in, carrying some desserts she had just bought for the family. His mother-in-law suddenly slapped her forehead in a moment of realization. She lamented that they had been talking so much, she completely forgot they hadn't even eaten yet. She hurried to the kitchen, took the food out of the oven, and set it all on the table. She called them all over, insisting they eat first and continue their talking later. His mother, however, was looking on with a very confused expression. She wondered what they could possibly be plotting that was so important they forgot to eat. His wife felt a bit flustered and tried to explain it to her mother, but he quickly stopped her. He told her it was nothing, simply noting that summer was just around the corner. He suggested that perhaps they could all go on a little vacation together for a few days. His mother thought it was a wonderful idea and told him to pick a place with his in-laws, making sure to listen to their opinions. He replied that they hadn't decided on a location yet, but told her not to worry, as he would handle everything. Then, his mother asked his wife why she didn't invite her sister to come along with them as well. His wife agreed, and seeing that the food was served, his mother greeted his mother-in-law before heading off to her Zumba class. His wife was left feeling quite confused and asked him why he hadn't just told his mother the truth. He simply reminded her that the woman had been a dedicated public servant for 50 years. He sat down, picked up a small roll, and began to eat, as if nothing were out of the ordinary. Suddenly, the cell phone resting on the sofa chimed with an incoming message. His wife practically pounced on it, rushing over to pick it up. She teased him, asking who could be messaging him and why he was so eager to see it. He just held his roll and jokingly asked if she was afraid he might see a secret little message from a friend. He popped a piece of bacon into his mouth and took a firm bite. The juices from the meat burst forth the moment he bit down. Immediately, the thick, rich sauce flooded his mouth with flavor. The warm juices carried with them a subtle, toasted aroma that was hard to resist. To be honest, the savory taste of a perfect Maillard reaction is truly addictive. He savored that first bite, letting himself be momentarily intoxicated by the scent. He let out a long sigh, feeling like a man who was finally, completely relaxed. But then, without warning, a piercing scream erupted from his wife. He turned his head sharply, only to find her shoving the cell phone right into his face. The screen was so close it occupied nearly his entire field of vision. It was a message from an unknown number that simply read, "I know what you're doing." It felt as if time itself had stopped, with only the blinking notification light struggling to prove that the world was still turning. Our protagonist is Yang Wang, a trained accountant who, ironically, has never actually practiced his profession. He graduated with a degree in accounting, but now the only figures he needs to calculate are how his family will survive the end of the world. He knew that even if he did the math perfectly, there was no guarantee they would live. But if he made a single mistake, they were almost certainly doomed. He slowly swallowed the food still in his mouth, trying to maintain his composure. And then, the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right on cue, the cell phone screen lit up once again. An incoming call appeared, coming from that very same unknown number. His wife practically tossed the phone onto the table and scrambled to hide behind him. She gripped his leg with all her strength, trembling as she waited for what was next. He answered the call and, for both of them to hear, switched it to speakerphone. A girl's clear voice rang out, playfully asking how they liked the little scare she'd given them. She laughed, asking if they were truly frightened by her little prank. Yang Wang replied that he wasn't, but noted that her sister had been scared half to death. The girl sounded confused, wondering how that was possible since she'd sent a message saying she'd changed. She asked if she had mentioned changing her number, urging him to check his phone again. Didn't you realize that you didn't have your data turned on, or that you weren't even connected to the Wi-Fi? But how? She stammered. Well, I'm going now. You'd better make it up to my sister, the girl added playfully. I'll call her tomorrow. And with that, the line went dead. Yang Wang showed the phone screen to his wife to prove the call had ended. She had already hung up, but his wife's hands were still trembling, this time from pure anger. That girl is out of her mind, she snapped. Tomorrow, you're going to pick her up at the hospital. Go get her in the car and have her write us a prescription, a full list for a home first aid kit. She told him to buy 20 of them and bring them back, and he simply agreed. Why buy them there? Well, because it was in another state, making it far less likely they would attract any unwanted attention. Besides, he thought through gritted teeth that Brat really needed to be taught a lesson. The family finished their dinner quickly, the atmosphere still thick with the weight of their secret. Once again, we find them spread out on the living room floor, continuing their grim investigation. His father-in-law, glass in hand, noted slowly that waste disposal was not going to be a simple matter. Solid waste would be relatively easy to treat, or so he claimed. With the correct dose of a decomposing agent, the remaining residue would be kept to a minimum. Everything would go into the septic tank, which, naturally, had to be very well hidden. They had to prevent anyone with bad intentions from realizing that the house was actually inhabited. In the coming years, they couldn't even dream of having it professionally cleaned. According to the design specs, the cleaning cycle was set for 12 months, based on a standard of 30 liters per person each day. The system can serve up to 200 people, and as we know, there are only 6 of them now. In other words, they wouldn't even have to think about cleaning it for another 30 years. He did a quick calculation in his head, just as his mother-in-law pointed toward the dog and the cat. The dog wasn't really a problem, as a decomposing agent could easily be made for his waste. He gently pushed the dog away as it approached him, though the cat, he realized, was a bit more complicated. While the waste itself could decompose, not every type of cat litter on the market is biodegradable. We see Jizo get up and swagger his way over to the litter box with an air of total indifference. To be perfectly honest, this fat cat, weighing nearly 10 kilos, really did have the bearing of a general. He cast a lazy, sidelong glance at the group of 2-legged slaves who were busy observing him. They continued their discussion, weighing their options for the long-term survival of the household. He watched the animal closely, wondering if they would be able to find the right kind of cat litter for the situation. If they found it, he'd take the cat along. Otherwise, the only option was to leave him behind with extra food. Just as he finished saying that, he felt a sharp gaze coming from the direction of the sofa. He jumped slightly and turned to look, but there was Juzo, calmly licking his paws as if nothing had happened. After the issue of wastewater, we moved to the next critical point, the disposal of solid waste. This was a problem for which he hadn't found a solution, even after scouring nearly 100 articles and forums. Mainly because people love to stockpile prepackaged foods, snacks, and bottled water when they gather supplies. Based on standard packaging ratios, the sheer volume of food consumed creates a massive amount of byproduct. Those who store over 150 cubic meters of supplies will soon find themselves surrounded by piles of trash. Plastic bags, as we know, have a nasty habit of never staying neatly in place once you've discarded them. And that is without even mentioning the food scraps that inevitably remain stuck inside the packaging. The leftover juices will rot and spoil, creating a truly unpleasant situation. By then, the room might smell so bad that even the zombies wouldn't want to take a bite out of you. It is, quite simply, impossible to completely avoid generating waste. At the very least, when one is stockpiling provisions, packaging becomes an unavoidable reality. As the period of confinement stretches on and supplies are consumed, the pile of solid waste will only grow. And these are the kinds of leftovers that one simply cannot afford to ignore. Nor can they be thrown away just anywhere, without a second thought. The first option would destroy the livability of the shelter entirely. The second would not only attract zombies, but likely people with far more money than sense. This is what makes our situation so difficult, though the solution actually has 2 parts. It must be addressed both at the source and through the proper treatment of the waste itself. He shook the Coca-Cola in his hand, making sure everyone could see it clearly. Regarding the packaging of the supplies we store, things like bottles, cans, and barrels must be avoided at all costs. That means avoiding containers with fixed volumes made of materials like glass, metal, or ceramics. So, does that mean you won't be having any more Coca-Cola? Between the various thanks and repeated comments from the group, they continued to review the details of their survival. Even more often, they had to honor the difficult choices made when their creative plans faced the harsh reality of the situation. And so, the discussion continued as they looked toward their uncertain future. Pedrock Breggy explained that they were going to need 2 small machines for their plan. he decided to show them an image so they could see exactly what he was talking about. The one on the left was a small, low-speed, vertical single-axis shredder. Its dimensions were roughly 60 centimeters by 46 centimeters, standing about 122 centimeters tall. The size of the waste it could process, he noted, shouldn't exceed 40 centimeters. It was capable of shredding paper, plastic, thin-walled metals, and even textiles. The maximum size of the resulting shredded material would be a mere 3 millimeters. He held up a soy container to give them a better sense of the scale. The machine on the right was a twin-screw plate compactor, boasting a pressure of 28 tons. Using a mold, it could take the shredded plastic and compress it into blocks of 15 by 20 centimeters. These blocks could then be stacked neatly, and both machines ran on 4.8 kilowatts of power. He pulled the blueprints closer and pointed toward a specific corner on the fourth floor. This was where the owner had originally planned to install the baghouse filter and the electrostatic precipitator. It was a small room with a few office chairs, perfectly suited for a spare parts warehouse. That is where they would store the compressed blocks and install 5 or 6 15-watt ultraviolet ozone lamps. The entire room would be filled with ozone and subjected to constant ultraviolet irradiation. This setup would effectively minimize the growth of bacteria and microorganisms, a vital precaution, naturally. He had already done the math for the 6 of them. They would generate approximately 0.2 cubic meters of solid waste every month. When asked about maintenance, he explained that the mechanical structure had almost no electronic circuit boards to fail. He added that there were no wear and tear parts to worry about either. The entire thing was made of pure, solid metal components, built for heavy-duty use. The threaded rods were standard, and the special parts were just solid chunks of metal that would hardly ever break. Therefore, they simply needed to keep a healthy supply of motors on hand. His father-in-law, as it turned out, was quite the expert when it came to mechanics. They would also need 4 sets of seals and various hardware. Conveniently, the motors for both machines were completely interchangeable. They could even serve as backups for the Yangcheng pump motor if needed. In addition to those, he suggested keeping 2 more spare motors in reserve. One might wonder if all that machinery would create a deafening racket. And what about the actual maintenance of the equipment? He explained it was a completely mechanical structure, with almost no electronic circuit boards to fail. Yes, it was refreshingly free of complex electronics. To solve the noise, they would need to build a shed using plywood. They would simply add some acoustic insulation, and that would be that. Finally, we come to the matter of waste disposal. This, relatively speaking, was actually the simplest part of the plan. In the building, the 3rd and 5th floors had originally been designed for a specific purpose. They were completely finished cold storage rooms. The cold room on the 4th floor, however, was still missing one corner to be fully finished. And here we see the dust collection equipment, including both the bag filters and the electrostatic precipitator. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors have ducts that connect right here, featuring internal panels to dampen the noise. Ventilation and soundproofing, as it turns out, wouldn't be an issue at all for the collection system. The section facing the exterior is the electrostatic precipitation tunnel. This tunnel is equipped with dozens of layers of metal mesh designed to trap every bit of dust. Though they are called meshes, they are actually more like heavy-duty grating plates. These are 5mm thick metal sheets, with various perforations to allow the air to pass through. It would be incredibly difficult to break through this grating, especially since the tunnel is barely 40 centimeters wide. How is it that you know this place so well? His mother-in-law finally asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. Because, as he explained, this happened to be the very project he was currently working on. After the owner took over this abandoned cold storage facility, he had insisted on hiring them for the job. They were responsible for the decoration and finishing of both the production workshop and the offices. But once they started moving in, how exactly was he going to explain it all to the owner? There were 13 people in total, for locals, and 9 from the outside. That evening, they were all going to sit down and have dinner together. One of them was expected to test positive during the coverage screening. Another would be responsible for finalizing the results of the vaccine tests. They would take the car home, finalize the assignments, and deliver the reports and documentation. The other would remain at the workstation to provide them with the necessary witness recommendations today. At that point, even the millionaires would find themselves being invaded, so they would no longer have to chase the secondary openings of this citizen's struggle. With these COVID agreements, they help us maintain a vacuum field. And truly, you all are going to represent certain milestones of the pandemic, even while your members study desktop Magic Linux. Through the blessed toys, your business will make use of them, and in the case of Twin Rising, we closed the bottom of our Play Store. Regarding the project payment, as agreed, it isn't my turn to pay the suppliers just yet. Right now, I have $3,800,000 in cash, and I can still order another batch of merchandise from them. Well, it's safe to say that we can now do whatever we want with this building. So what exactly is the plan for using it? This building has 5 floors in total. The first floor serves as the loading platform and the room for the water purification equipment. At the moment, there is quite a lot of debris scattered across that first floor. We are going to leave it basically as it is, mess and all. That way, we confuse the owner and maintain the charade that this is just an abandoned project. The second floor contains the office area and the exhibition room. Currently, all the raw materials are piled up there, and we have no intention of moving them. Again, this is simply to maintain the appearance of total abandonment. As for the stairs from the second to the third floor, we have already blocked them with a water door. I still have 3,800,000 in cash for more goods. The third floor entrance is made of a stainless steel structure and wooden boards. We just need to weld some reinforcement rods and join it to the steel structure of the stairs to make it a single piece. That way, the zombies won't be able to climb up, even though the cold rooms on the third and fifth floors are already finished. We aren't going to use them. Partly, as we've seen, it's to confuse any potential intruders. Since the third and fifth floors have no windows, we see how easy it was for him to get confused about his location upon first entering. By modifying the steel structure, they managed to create a clever illusion to hide the existence of the fourth floor entirely. On the other hand, it serves as a vital layer of acoustic insulation to block any sound coming from that hidden fourth floor. The fourth floor is their main base of operations, which includes both the living quarters and the survival zone. This fourth floor spans a total of 830 square meters, providing more than enough space for their needs. The air purification equipment and other essential systems take up about 170 square meters of that space. Another 200 meters are dedicated to the survival area, leaving a generous 460 square meters for the living area. The fourth floor covers a total of 830 square meters. Yes, he repeated it, perhaps just to marvel at the sheer scale of it. It really is a massive space of 830 square meters. At this point, he couldn't help but think his father-in-law was a total genius. With just a few well-chosen words, the man had hit the nail right on the head. The original owner had planned to build a laboratory on the third floor, the kind that requires absolute acoustic isolation. To achieve this, he had used a specialized soundproof prefabricated room. A soundproof prefab room, as the name suggests, is a modular construction with high-level insulation in the walls, floor, and ceiling. Everything is manufactured at the factory and then simply assembled right here on site. It comes fully integrated with doors, windows, and all the necessary plumbing and electrical installations. He wondered if there were internal divisions within those 200 square meters. And naturally, he asked if a crane would be required to install the heavy ceiling panels. As it turns out, no crane is needed because the panel joints act as the structural supports themselves. Once the floor and walls are set, the ceiling can be hoisted up using the built-in pulley system. After explaining the process, he showed the installation video to his father-in-law to prove just how simple it would be. We see that the structure is far from a simple box, as it features several internal divisions. There is a transition room and 2 smaller dressing rooms, which together add up to 20 square meters. In addition, there are 3 other rooms of 20 square meters each, distributed along the sides. This leaves a central hall of 120 square meters, a massive space, to be honest. He wondered then if they would have to build another separate room for Bebe. As it turns out, that won't be necessary. They only need to remove the walls separating the transition room and dressing rooms. And just like that, they are left with a perfectly sized 20 square meter room. With the walls they remove, they can even set up a bathroom right there in the main hall. But what about the kitchen? He calculated that they wouldn't be cooking elaborate, high-heat stir-fried dishes anymore. Those generate far too much smoke and noise, so the air fryer and steam oven will become their primary tools. He realized with some relief that this would save him a great deal of work. His mother-in-law smiled slightly, noting that the eternal problem of washing the dishes remained unsolved. He pointed out that everyone uses a dishwasher these days, which seemed like a fair point, and his wife reminded him that he certainly didn't want them using disposable plates. His wife always knew exactly how to joke about the heart of the matter. After all, who actually wants to wash dishes? Naturally, the dishwasher simply has to work. He joked that he couldn't even remember how to wash them by hand anymore. Besides, a dishwasher uses much less water than washing by hand, a vital detail for survival. It is an essential luxury, but he was certain they could always find a spot for it. The dishwasher was indispensable, and he immediately reminded them that they had both water and electricity. They would only need to add a small pressure pump to ensure the dishwasher has enough water pressure. And just like that, the problem is solved. He admitted to himself that he didn't know much about electricity. He wondered if he could figure out how to connect the 220-volt output from the Vlade-type battery bank to the living area. We see that there are 5 battery banks in total to work with. The plan was to use them in 2 groups of 2. Every week, the spare bank would replace one of the others in a constant rotation. He wondered what components would be needed, so his father-in-law grabbed a pen and began making calculations. A 60-amp distribution cabinet with a group of 3-level switches at the output, it was a solid plan. They waited for quite a while, but his father-in-law remained deeply absorbed in his math. By the time 10 p.m. rolled around, he and his wife decided it was time to head home for the night. After all, the goal for today was simply to reach an agreement, and they had managed to plan quite a lot. It was much more than he expected. Tomorrow his wife has to pick up her sister, and he has to buy supplies at the factory. So he decided it would be best to get some rest early. We should note that his parents-in-law live all the way up on the 6th floor. Suddenly, it occurred to him to suggest that they take the stairs instead of the elevator. In the future, there won't be any elevators to use, so they began their descent down the stairwell. In modern high-rise buildings, the stairs are basically reserved for emergencies only. Normally, aside from the cleaning and maintenance staff, almost no one ever uses them. Furthermore, the stairwell itself is tucked away in a dark corner of the building. Hardly any light from the outside reaches in, and the lamps are already looking a bit old and dim. The lights flickered incessantly, and just like that, the atmosphere took on a sudden, suspenseful chill. He tried to crack a joke to lighten his wife's mood, but she didn't pay him any attention whatsoever. He simply scratched his nose, feeling more than a little awkward in the silence. By the time they reached the second floor, we see that there wasn't a single window left leading down. There was only the floor ahead and a small ceiling lamp that flickered every now and then. To be honest, they had never actually taken the stairs before this moment. It occurred to him then that the stairwell looked identical to the cold, sterile stairs of a meat locker. He couldn't help himself and tried to joke with his wife once more. But as he looked down, he was met with quite a surprise. He wondered exactly when Yeso had managed to slip out. He reached out his arms to pick him up, and Yeso jumped right into his embrace on his own. He promised the little one that once they reached the first floor, he would take the elevator back up. As they rounded the corner of the final flight of stairs, the first-floor fire door came into view. It seemed some thoughtless neighbor had blocked the first-floor exit with a heavy metal gate. To make matters worse, they had sealed it off completely, without leaving any sort of opening. He stepped closer and gave the metal bars a few experimental knocks. The gate responded with a cold, metallic clang that echoed through the quiet stairwell. He turned around, just as he was about to complain to his wife about the obstruction. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream erupted, echoing sharply in his ears. It was a high-pitched, harrowing sound, as if someone were straining their vocal cords to the absolute limit. The zombies, they had arrived much sooner than anyone could have anticipated. Boom. With a deafening crash, the emergency door collapsed, and one by one, they appeared, drenched in blood. Raw, mangled faces twisted behind the metal bars, screaming in a way that defied nature. An endless sea of hands reached through the gaps, desperate to pull the zombies forward. Suddenly, he was hit by a nauseating gust of wind, reeking of fresh blood and advanced rot. It was enough to make anyone gag. Fortunately, he had just taken a step back in time. And so, by a stroke of luck, he managed to keep himself out of the zombies' reach. He scrambled up the stairs, putting several steps of distance between them and the horror below. Seeing that the metal gate was firmly holding the zombies back, he breathed a small sigh of relief. He hurried back up the steps to grab his wife and pull her to safety. He told her they had to move fast to get back and warn their parents immediately. But even as he saw the gate holding firm, he couldn't simply remain silent. No, he couldn't stay quiet. He was about to speak again when she raised her finger and pointed directly behind him. He turned around, and what he saw in that moment was enough to make his blood run cold. A few zombie rats, nearly hairless, were struggling to climb over the zombies to squeeze through the gate. The one leading the pack was already tumbling through the bars and falling toward the floor. He realized they were in deep trouble. In the trial version, he hadn't seen anything like this. To be honest, the idea of needing a defense against rats had never even crossed his mind. Though, judging by their appearance, their physical state didn't seem to exceed the agility of a normal rat. The real problem, however, was that they were using the zombies as a living bridge to bypass the barriers. One of the zombie rats had already hit the floor and was scurrying at full speed toward the stairs. Deep down, he fell into utter despair, and unable to do anything else, he simply closed his eyes. Meow. The soft sound of a cat's meow echoed through the air. Suddenly, the guttural growls of the zombies vanished entirely. He snapped his eyes open, only to find that everything was brightly lit. He was sitting on the sofa, and Juso was curled up in his lap, though he had no idea when the cat had arrived. His father-in-law was at the dining table, drawing quietly, while his wife watched him with a worried expression. He asked her what time it was, and she replied that it was just after 8:30. He was surprised it was so early, but she explained he'd fallen asleep right after asking her father to calculate the materials. It hadn't even been 2 hours. In fact, it hadn't even been 5 minutes before he woke up again. He looked down at Juso, who, seeing him awake, lifted his head, stretched, and hopped off his lap. The cat waddled away, and for some reason, his gait seemed to carry a distinct air of arrogance. Meanwhile, we see that his father-in-law already had the list of materials ready to go. He took a photo of it and sent it to the electronics store he usually worked with. He left them a message, requesting that they prepare double the usual amount of merchandise. His plan was to go and pick everything up first thing the following morning. After that, he turned to speak with his father-in-law to share a new concern. He had been thinking about the barrier between the second and third floors. He realized that a simple metal gate wouldn't be enough to keep them safe. If animals like rats or cockroaches were to turn into zombies, he feared they wouldn't be able to stop them. "What do you think? My wife is truly incredible," he said, looking at his father-in-law. She had suggested using the armored glass from her bank to secure their home. The idea was to use it like a wall, completely sealing off the hallway leading to the stairs. But, as we soon learn, it wasn't realistic, as the production cycle to harden normal glass takes about 5 days. And that, mind you, is only for common 10mm tempered glass. He then gave his wife a brief, albeit necessary, lesson on the realities of glass manufacturing. If they wanted the 30mm multi-layered laminated glass used in bank windows, the production cycle would jump to 20 days. That wasn't even counting the necessary permits, which, to be honest, they had no hope of obtaining in time. Furthermore, installing tempered glass requires a specialized frame to hold everything in place. The size of the glass and the density of the frame are inversely proportional. Essentially, the smaller the glass panes are, the denser and heavier the frame must be. This means more connection points between the frame, the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. The total weight is massive, and if not installed perfectly, the entire glass partition could simply collapse on its own. This is why those survival articles claiming you can just order custom glass days before an outbreak are completely wrong. A tempering furnace wouldn't even have enough time to heat up and cool back down. Besides, if someone with bad intentions showed up, they could simply dismantle the frame itself. It's a simple matter of a large sledgehammer and a small mallet, no trickery required, just brute force. So, he concluded that if they truly wanted to block the path using glass, it just wasn't possible. To secure the way upstairs, he realized the only real solution involved something much sturdier: cement. They would have to pour a solid concrete containment block to keep the world out. The previous owner had requested a complete redo of the cement, the mortar base, and the self-leveling floor on the second level. As a result, all the necessary sand, gravel, and cement are already sitting right there on the second floor. It would be a terrible waste, and quite frankly, a bit foolish, not to put those materials to good use. We have to keep in mind that the first zombie in the complex appeared on the 28th, at noon on the second day of the outbreak. This gives us plenty of time during the night of the 27th to fill the stairwell with solid concrete. And while we're at it, we can seal up the service shafts and the electrical ducts as well. He also planned to use a staggered sealing method for maximum security. In other words, the water and power lines they actually use would be sealed off on the first, second, and third floors. As for the fifth floor ducts they don't use, those would be sealed on floors 3, 4, and 5. The elevator wouldn't be spared either, specifically on the fourth floor. They would install a switch on the elevator circuit so that no one else could possibly operate it. By doing this, they completely block any route leading from the other floors toward their sanctuary on the third, fourth, and fifth. He reminded himself to either destroy the elevator control panel or track down the manufacturer for a specific spare part. "Father-in-law, I don't follow," he admitted, only to be met with a playful, "Oh, you silly boy. Think about it. If people open the elevator and see 5 buttons, who is going to believe there are only 4 floors?" The old man was certainly clever. After a bit of research, he found that the elevator came from a domestic supplier. He managed to find the local provider's phone number and gave them a call immediately. He explained that there was one floor he wanted to keep private, so people couldn't reach it just by pressing a button. To his surprise, the person on the other end of the line was incredibly understanding about the request. "You're running a private club or a spa, aren't you?" they asked, assuming they knew exactly what was going on. "I understand," the voice on the phone replied. "What you're asking for is actually quite simple." As it turns out, they already had a ready-made solution for exactly that kind of request. They explained that he could use a specific call button instead of the one usually designated for that floor. The trick was that he would have to keep it pressed down to activate the floor. Alternatively, he could use the other buttons to enter a password, which would then grant access to that level. Since this didn't exactly follow standard regulations, he would have to pick it up and install it himself. But to him, this was nothing short of perfect, exactly what he needed for his sanctuary. Deciding it was better if they didn't come over, he didn't think twice and ordered 2 panels. He made arrangements to go and pick them up himself the following day at noon. Finally, we move on to the layout of the space, specifically the crucial storage area. Unlike others who might simply toss cardboard boxes onto the floor, he had a better plan. He chose to use loading pallets, knowing that the greatest advantage of pallet storage is how easily things can be moved. With a forklift, he could transport an entire load of goods in a single trip, which is quite efficient, really. Each plastic pallet measured 1.5 by 1.2 meters, providing a sturdy base for his supplies. A single pallet can support a static load of up to a ton and can be stacked as high as 1.6 meters. That adds up to about 2.83 cubic meters of storage per unit. We see that in his 460 square meter storage area, every inch was being carefully accounted for. Since there was no need to leave room for large vehicles, he could reduce the aisles to just 1 meter. By organizing the rows and leaving just enough space to maneuver, he could fit 180 pallets into the room. If they used a quarter of the remaining warehouse space, they could use the second floor boards for hydroponic boxes to grow fresh vegetables. To ensure they had enough to eat, he planned to place continuous shelving along the edge of the living area. In total, we see that this would provide about 60 meters of shelf space. Each unit would have 4 levels and stand 1.6 meters high. It would make it easy to grab items while simultaneously storing a significant amount of supplies. He wondered if there were enough shelves and pallets currently in stock. As it turned out, there were. The factory was conveniently located just 2 kilometers from the cold storage warehouse. Since he had bought from them before, he went to check that afternoon and placed the order immediately upon seeing their inventory. He ended up ordering nearly their entire stock that afternoon, and they even gave him a discount for it. Furthermore, he paid a 50% deposit, with the remaining balance due in 30 days. Now, you might wonder how they would grow food without sunlight, but he had planned for full-spectrum LED grow lights. For 100 square meters, they would need about 8 kilowatts, though he knew plants might not grow as well as they would with specifically tuned light. Still, he told himself that they would at least be able to harvest something. He began to reflect on everything he still had pending on his list. He realized that, basically, all that remained now was to execute the plan. Everything that could possibly be planned was already settled. After discussing it with his wife, the two of them prepared to head back home. Before leaving, she was still giving instructions to her mother about packing clothes and other essentials. Meanwhile, he couldn't take his eyes off Juso. The dog, for his part, didn't seem to have a single care in the world. He was just lying there, completely relaxed with his paws crossed, which, to be honest, was quite a sight. As he watched the dog, he reminded his mother-in-law to make sure she packed all of Juso's things. His plan was to take everything over to the new location all at once later on. At the mention of his name, Juso's tail began to wag with evident joy. The very first thing he did upon waking up the next morning was check the news on Weibo. He recalled the details of the event, June 21st, at approximately 6:30 in the morning. A U.S. military F-35 fighter jet had crashed in Japan shortly after the pilot managed to eject. It fell directly onto the containment dome of the Manju nuclear reactor, causing a massive number of casualties and, simultaneously, releasing an enormous, catastrophic amount of radiation into the environment. He even harbored a dark suspicion that this was the very reason the zombies had appeared. By 6:32, the top trending topic on Weibo shifted rapidly to the news of the U.S. plane crashing into the Japanese plant. He let out a long sigh and turned off the screen, telling himself that whatever must happen will happen. In the end, he knew a person simply has to manage on their own. Our protagonist, Jan Wong, had studied food science during his university years. And yet, by some strange twist of fate, he had ended up working in the interior design industry. But now, he intended to use his knowledge of food and his professional contacts to secure his family's survival. He woke his wife, who had already spent the previous evening talking things over with her sister. His proposal for everyone to head out on a group trip together was accepted immediately. They had even taken advantage of the night shift to prepare a comprehensive grocery list. The necessary funds for the supplies had already been transferred to his wife's phone. His mother got up as well, and the three of them sat down for a quick, quiet breakfast. And so, we see them divide up the tasks. Jan, of course, would take charge of securing the supplies here in the city. His wife would take the car to pick up her sister, though she first had to stop for medicines using an electronic prescription. His mother, as she always did, headed out for a walk on her own. To be honest, Jan had very specific reasons for not involving his mother in the preparations. First of all, the lady was over 70 years old, more than a decade older than his parents-in-law. The truth was, there simply wasn't much she could do to help. Secondly, his mother was used to being out and about. She had many friends, and seeing everyone so busy would surely raise suspicions. Her friends would undoubtedly notice, and in a small circle, information leaks quite easily. Thirdly, she had served the people for 50 years. Her loyalty to the community was as clear as the morning sun. The moment she learned of the situation, it was almost certain she would report it to the local authorities. Regardless of whether that report worked, it would definitely interfere with their urgent preparations. He told his wife, to take a good look at his colleague's car. That vehicle was much larger than their own Viva Deeching Diani. It was comfortable to drive, and, more importantly, it could hold a massive amount of cargo. He had kept an eye on that hybrid car. With a full tank, it could cover 320 kilometers. Since she was heading to her sister's house anyway, he reminded her that the gas station over there was cheaper. He told her to fill the tank and buy 4 40-liter canisters of gasoline. She was to fill them up and hide them beneath the other supplies she purchased. He also suggested she grab whatever food she craved, knowing that soon, such opportunities would vanish. As soon as he saw them off, Jan began to attend to his own pressing business. First, we see Jan head out to order the electrical materials and the elevator control panel. For the elevator panel, he chose a complex system requiring a password plus verification combined with hardware authorization. The elevator technician watched him with a great deal of curiosity, as you might imagine. Seeing that he had chosen the most complicated system available, the man quietly asked for the installation address. He wanted to know why such a fuss was necessary, but Jan just smiled and said it was for a friend, the kind who knows how to fight. He even jokingly asked the technician if he wanted to go take a look that night. The poor man turned pale with fright. After that, Jan visited a grain and oil company to order rice, flour, and various cereals. Taking into account that grains only last about 3 years in storage, he was careful not to buy too much. He calculated the needs at precisely 7.5 kilos per person per month. The ratio of basic grains to other cereals was set at a strict 9-to-1. He also stored enough oil for 3 years, though his family didn't actually use that much. Since everyone in the family was a bit overweight, he calculated 5 liters every 3 months and bought 2 large jugs of soybean oil. To add some variety to their diet, he reduced the amount of soybean oil and added butter to the list. It wouldn't just serve as cooking oil, it could also be used for Western dishes and desserts. They rarely consumed flour at home, so he decided that 10 5-kilo bags would be more than enough. He also grabbed 5 bags of low-protein flour, just to improve the quality of their future meals. He requested everything be placed on a pallet and plastic wrapped, but he was clever enough to ask for delivery the following day. After that, he called the farm to hurry them along, demanding they deliver the storage shelves that very afternoon. He realized he didn't need quite so many pallets, so he reduced that particular order to 30. The reason was simple. A short while ago, the Lianzhou company had given him several pallets for free. They didn't even ask for a deposit. It was simply a matter of rotating them out, which was quite convenient. He handed over the supplies he had in the car to his father-in-law, who then took them straight to the construction site. The older man would spend the entire afternoon there, meticulously assembling the electrical boxes and the wiring. Jan, for his part, boarded the bullet train and headed straight for the provincial capital. We see that he had two very specific reasons for visiting the capital on this particular day. The first was to borrow a 40-foot refrigerated truck with local plates from a friend of his. He needed it to move the merchandise from his warehouse into a proper cold storage unit. This way, he could use the trip to the capital as a perfect excuse for moving the cargo without anyone else seeing. Under this cover, the goods could be transported safely and discreetly to the cold storage room. The second reason for his trip was to visit several food companies he had previously located. Some specialized in freeze-dried vegetables and soup bases, while others focused on prepared meals and flexible pouch preserves. These flexible preserves, to be clear, are the ones that come in specialized plastic and aluminum bags. They offered clearance items like taro balls, tapioca pearls, mochi, dried tofu, and even milk tea powder. The list went on and on. He also made sure to visit manufacturers of various frozen meat products. If all went well, this container, with over 78 cubic meters of frozen goods, would feed his entire family for 3 years. And the most important detail was that the truck's cooling system was portable and could be plugged into a standard outlet. He could dismantle it, move it to the storage area, build a small shed, and just like that, he'd have his own cold room. This hidden warehouse within a warehouse is, without a doubt, the ideal substitute for a standard refrigerator. Besides, as we already know, they had plenty of insulating material left over to finish the job. By the time afternoon rolled around, he was already hauling a container completely filled with merchandise. He returned to his company's warehouse and parked the truck. His father-in-law had already arrived, and together they went to the dealership to replace a vehicle's engine. The older man pointed to one side, noting that the shipments of grain and oil had finally arrived. The shelving units were there too, and when he entered, someone curiously asked what it was all for. He told them that Jan had taken on a project for a small village supermarket. The merchandise was arriving little by little, just as planned. The shop over there was already prepared, so there wouldn't be any issues. He had already moved the materials for the acoustic panel room to the 4th floor using the forklift and the elevator. He tested it out, and to be honest, it worked remarkably well. All that remained was to screw the frame into place for the final installation. Using the forklift to hold the panel, they could align the holes and screw everything together. And that was that, though he likely struggled to align those holes on his own, didn't he? Bao Bei returned in the afternoon, and they helped him hold everything in place. It was a quick job. They simply dropped him off and headed straight home afterward. After closing the warehouse gate, the two of them took a taxi to the bullet train station to pick up his BYD. On the way, his father-in-law asked him if all these plans were merely for hiding. He wondered if the day came when hiding was no longer an option, how Jan planned to escape with his life. Jan found himself staring at the flickering light of the traffic signal, lost in thought. He had already considered this, deciding to take both the Densa D9 and his BYD to the dealership for maintenance the next day. Both cars, we should note, were DMP models. With a full tank and a complete charge, these vehicles can travel more than 1,200 kilometers. The auxiliary fuel tank for the Tan will be kept full as well. Earlier today, he asked Bao Bei to bring an extra 160 liters of gasoline. With that, they would have enough fuel for the Tian. Otherwise, they wouldn't reach a range of 2,500 kilometers. The BYD Super Hybrid system features multiple operating modes, offering great power and high speeds, along with excellent stability and low fuel consumption, among other advantages. His own Dandiantai has an electric range of over 240 kilometers. His father-in-law's Densa D9, meanwhile, reaches an electric range of 260 kilometers. Equipped with automatic systems and dual motors, the vehicles are designed to maintain peak efficiency during travel. The high-end versions even include advanced sensors to optimize fuel consumption, a vital feature for what's coming. He realized that in a moment of crisis, having that kind of freedom and range would be their only hope. To escape, they would simply have to break through the partition wall, and they'd be on their way. But a question remained. How would they get to the car if the outside was crawling with zombies or desperate people? When Yian's cold storage warehouse was built, safety escape routes were included, though it's really just a pole. You simply wrap your arms around it and slide all the way down. The owner, wanting things to look tidy, had asked him to cover the pole up. Now, he only needed to place enough cushioning material at the bottom for a safe landing. Although they hadn't practiced the maneuver yet, he felt certain they could manage it. But then he corrected himself. They couldn't afford to leave such things to chance. Once they moved in, everyone would have to practice until it became second nature. After picking up the car, we take a little detour to the agricultural machinery market. The DJI agricultural drones are incredibly powerful and have impressive flight times, but they are also quite expensive. He didn't actually plan on buying one. Instead, he rented one using credit and scheduled an appointment with the pilot. They agreed that he would pick up the drone on the morning of the appointed day. The pilot is set to meet with him on the afternoon of the 27th. He truly hopes the man shows up. He wouldn't even mind bringing him along so he can survive too. We see them check the time. It's already 8 p.m., so they decide not to head home just yet. They grab a quick bite to eat on the street and make their way back to the cold storage warehouse. Once inside, he switches on the 8 groups of 64 explosion-proof lights mounted on the ceiling. Then he closes the door and steps outside for a moment to listen. To be honest, he's being cautious. The sound wasn't exactly loud, but he couldn't say there was no noise at all. They spend the next half hour repeatedly running tests to see how much noise they're actually making. They confirm that if they only turn on one group of lights, the sound becomes almost imperceptible. In that case, he realizes he needs to install new switches to change from groups of 8 bulbs to groups of 2. No sooner said than done. While taking a switch apart, he discovers the lights aren't in series, but use a parallel bridge. That makes things much easier, so he disconnects the neutral wire, leaving only 2 lights on the circuit. And sure enough, for a moment, there is absolute silence. You didn't even have to leave the room for the sound to disappear completely. It takes him about half an hour to switch every group to 2 bulbs per switch and finish the installation. He leaves some extra cable behind, planning to install a secondary master switch in the living room later on. Since there is no internet in the bedroom, he realizes there is simply no way for him to manage the server from there. He had even considered adding a neutral wire to the circuit, but it just wasn't possible, so he turns his attention to the prefabricated house his father-in-law built. Everything seemed to be in order, so each of them hops onto a forklift to get back to work. By 11:30 that night, the prefabricated house is finally ready. Tomorrow, they plan to use structural adhesive and glass silicone to finish the job. This will seal the joints properly, leaving the interior work to be finished sometime after the 27th. He and his father-in-law head up to the 3rd floor to inspect the ceiling work on the house's structural cube. Afterward, with his mother-in-law's help, he examines the staircase area, a triangular space about 1.5 meters wide. In total, we are looking at a volume of 7.56 cubic meters. If they were to fill the entire thing with concrete, it would weigh roughly 17 tons. The staircase, however, can only support about 3.3 tons. So, naturally, sealing it completely with concrete is out of the question. He and his father-in-law stand there for quite a while, lost in thought. In the end, the only logical conclusion they can reach is to demolish the staircase entirely. He thinks it over and tells the older man that demolishing reinforced concrete, whether by cutting or hammering, is just too much trouble. It would create a massive amount of noise and a huge scene, which is the last thing they need. They have to find another way, but if they won't cut or demolish the concrete, the only option left is to blow it up. But getting mining dynamite these days is quite difficult, isn't it? It's heavily regulated, and as it turns out, ammonium nitrate is the only thing one can actually get a hold of. Since ammonium nitrate isn't that hard to make, he suggests they could simply prepare it themselves. Ammonium nitrate is a dangerous, explosive substance restricted by the state. Weren't you supposed to be a humanities student? Besides, as far as his father-in-law could remember, chemistry had never exactly been his strong suit. He hadn't learned this in school. Of course, they decided that on the night of the 27th, they would seal the fire door with cement and set the detonators on the stairs. And then, in the early hours of the 28th, they would blow the whole thing up. He and his father-in-law returned to the city and, before doing anything else, decided to go to the steam baths for a long soak. After all, they were quite certain that in a few days, there wouldn't be another chance for such luxuries. After a good soak, some time in the steam, and a thorough scrub, they felt as fresh as daisies and sat down to enjoy some skewers. They began to tally up which household appliances they could actually take with them. The list included the freezer, the dishwasher, the steam oven, the air fryer, the purifier, the water cooler, the electric kettle, the rice cooker, and the electric boiler, along with the electric blanket, the oil heater, the space heater, and the refrigerator. The television was considered mandatory, though some devices couldn't just be taken as they were. For instance, they would have to remove the speaker cables from the TV, and the whole family would need to use bone conduction headphones, all to avoid making even the slightest bit of unnecessary noise. However, they couldn't seem to agree on the electric hot pot or the microwave. His father-in-law argued that the hot pot used too much electricity and that, in the future, they wouldn't have many chances to eat hot pot anyway. He felt the microwave was better for heating food quickly, which, in his mind, would also save energy. But our protagonist worried that the microwave had very high power spikes and, frankly, made far too much noise. It simply didn't feel safe, and as for the air conditioning, both of them were filled with doubt. Obviously, for the sake of comfort, the air conditioning would be the best thing to have. But its massive energy consumption and the noise it produced left them both feeling deeply concerned. The foot massage tub and the automatic mahjong table were discarded immediately. Some things were simply too much. However, they did decide to bring a wooden tub and a standard mahjong set for manual shuffling. Naturally, they planned to glue sponges and transparent silicone sheets onto the mahjong tiles to dampen the sound. though, to be honest, that would make it quite impossible to shuffle them properly. As for the massage guns and other small gadgets, he decided he could take two, but the sound system was absolutely forbidden. And it wasn't just the speakers. Anything fragile was strictly off the list. From now on, every piece of tableware in the house would have to be made of metal. They said their goodbyes to the robot vacuum and the smart toilet as well. After all, in their new reality, such things would be utterly useless. The air inside the cold room is clean and dry, so there is almost no dust to worry about anyway. Nor would they be using a traditional toilet. Instead, they would use a portable toilet, much like the ones found in motorhomes. And so, with everything planned, he sat down and calculated the total power consumption. As long as everything wasn't running at maximum capacity at once, there shouldn't be any major problems. After all, they wouldn't exactly have every single appliance turned on at the same time. In addition to the 2 main blade battery sets, they also had 10 extra battery packs ready. These were specifically meant to handle any sudden spikes in energy consumption. By the time he dropped his father-in-law off and returned to his own home, it was already 2 in the morning. He reviewed his progress and felt a sense of relief. Everything was on track, and he was even a bit ahead of schedule. Even so, he knew he had to hurry to leave himself enough time to deal with any unforeseen complications. He recalled a prediction that clean air would one day be sold like purified water, as it had become an extreme luxury. Now, he realized that person was absolutely right. The hot, dry air felt as if it wanted to strip every drop of moisture from his body. But worse still, the air was thick with a rotting stench that threatened to cause a complete disaster for his senses. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to vomit, a sensation so powerful it was impossible to hold back. In the end, he simply couldn't endure it any longer. He leaned over the edge of the roof and let it all out. The vomit landed directly on a zombie below, soaking the creature completely. But the zombie didn't seem to mind the lack of respect, which, to be honest, is the least of its concerns now. On the contrary, what truly caught their interest was the scent of a living human lingering in the mess. He watched carefully from above and noticed that after the rats turned into zombies, their mobility seemed greatly reduced. He fought back another wave of nausea as he realized they still had the ability to climb the walls using the glass supports. They kept climbing, though it was quite unexpected to see that insects didn't seem affected by the zombie virus at all. At the very least, we see the flies and mosquitoes flying around with total normality. Flies and mosquitoes, a small detail, perhaps, but a strange one. There were mosquitoes everywhere, and he suddenly felt a sharp sting on the back of his hand. Without giving it much thought, he killed the mosquito with a quick slap and went back to his observations. He watched as they maintained the ability to scale the wall, reaching for the supports of the glass facade. They continued their ascent, yet the mosquitoes remained seemingly immune to the virus. And so, the flies and mosquitoes continued to fly about as if nothing in the world had changed. Flies and mosquitoes, a small detail, perhaps, but a strange one. There were mosquitoes everywhere, and he suddenly felt a sharp sting on the back of his hand. Without giving it much thought, he killed the mosquito with a quick slap and went back to his observations, still pondering those flies and mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were persistent, and he felt another sting right on the back of his hand. Hardly noticing, he swatted the insect away with a single blow and continued his careful observation of the scene below. It was then that he realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had chosen the wrong shelter. Fortunately, he told himself there was still time to find a better place. Later, while sitting on the toilet, he began to carefully reconstruct every detail of his dream. First, he was certain the scene from the dream had taken place in the cold room. Down there, only one zombie remained, which meant the cold room hadn't attracted survivors or anything else that might interest the undead. Second, he remembered this wasn't the first time he had encountered zombie rats. To be honest, he hadn't given it much thought the last time it happened. But now, he noticed that the jumping ability and speed of the zombie rats had significantly decreased. This proved that the virus severely damages the body's motor functions, a small mercy in its own way. Third, we see that mosquitoes can still fly normally, indicating the virus doesn't actually infect the insects themselves. However, those that drink blood could undoubtedly transmit the virus to others. The pest control at the refrigerated warehouse was better than nothing, but it simply wasn't enough. It was a difficult situation to grasp, and he knew it was urgent to start a comprehensive plan against the flies and mosquitoes. And so, he called an old friend from university to ask for advice on designing pest, heat, and insect control systems for buildings. His friend sent over his location and invited him to visit his factory. He quickly calculated the time and realized it worked out perfectly. Besides, the place wasn't very far from his house at all. It was a good chance to see him in person, so he stopped by his in-laws' house to pick up his wife so they could go together. By the time they reached the factory, there were actually 3 of them in the car. His sister-in-law had stuck to them like glue, which, naturally, was to be expected. As it turns out, his friend's factory was a chocolate factory. They produced pure chocolate, handling the entire fermentation process themselves. Roasting, grinding, tempering, and packaging. We see the entire process unfolding here. His friend gave them a detailed tour, though he was quite confused as to why he was so interested in the heat-proofing measures of the workshop and warehouse. And, of course, in his specific methods for controlling insects, mosquitoes, and flies. He explained in great detail how to set up the necessary barriers. They covered every key point, including multiple non-lethal optical devices and various active and passive capture systems. He even went over the layout for chemical barriers and other defenses. He spent the next 2 hours taking a massive amount of photos. He also asked his friend to help him create a rough design for a similar space. He managed to get the supplier information and, after loading up 2 huge boxes of chocolates, he prepared to head out. After thanking his friend for the gifts, they said their goodbyes and left the factory. On the way back, his wife took the list of suppliers his friend had provided, and she began calling them one by one to order all the necessary equipment. However, things like the rat-proof plates, mosquito nets, and pesticide channels were things we would have to handle ourselves. We stopped by the dealership to give the tank a complete top-to-bottom service. The mechanics performed a thorough inspection of both the battery and the engine. After that, he took the car over to his friend's factory workshop. The goal was to swap out the standard tires for a set of heavy-duty run flats. They also applied a dark tint to all the windows, for privacy, one assumes. And finally, they applied a matte black wrap. By the time they finished the entire process, it was already noon. The 3 of them headed out to a Japanese restaurant for lunch. After all, they wouldn't be able to enjoy fresh raw fish for a very long time. On the way to the cold storage warehouse, he began to reflect and decided to call one of his suppliers. He ordered 2 stainless steel cages on wheels, custom-sized for the Biwataton and the Densa D9 respectively. These would cover the cars completely, maintaining a protective distance of 30 centimeters from the bodywork. The design was based on tank slat armor, welded with stainless steel angles 5 centimeters wide and 3 millimeters thick. Once the cages arrived, he planned to weld on stainless steel plates to create a shutter-like defense. Finally, he would weld the cage structure directly to the roof rack. As long as the cage's own wheels touched the ground, the chassis wouldn't have to support any excessive weight. The battery range would drop, but the defense would increase enough to smash through plaster walls or even zombie hordes. Upon arriving at the warehouse, he stored the chocolates and the pest control supplies in their designated spots. He had been discussing a certain matter with his friend, who admitted there wasn't much he could do. His father-in-law agreed. The security of the hallway landing would be a major problem once the stairs were blown. Even without the stairs, we had to wonder what would happen if something were actually able to jump that high. After turning it over in our minds, we decided that once the stairs were destroyed, we would use the hoist to block the landing with a precast concrete slab. If time permitted, he could even seal the slab to the wall with cement, turning the whole thing into a single, solid piece. By the afternoon, he also brought over the materials for the stair landing. His friend insisted there was nothing more he could do, so on the way back, he simply picked up some extra window film. After all, according to the law, the windshield and the front windows are a different story. They aren't allowed to have privacy tinting, so he gave the film to his wife and her sister to handle. It will look how it looks, he figured. The real work tonight was to begin drilling into the stairs from both sides. Meanwhile, we see him alone on the 5th floor, meticulously preparing the charges needed to blow the stairs. When he finished, realizing there was nothing else to be done for now, he put the charges away with extreme caution. All that remained was to take care of the detonators, and his work there would be complete. He took a moment to stretch his tired muscles before stepping into the elevator. And here we discovered that his father-in-law has already replaced the elevator's control panel. Now, without the correct password, absolutely no one would be able to reach the 4th floor. At noon, a call came in from the factory to let him know that his custom cages were finally ready. He had to move quickly to get the supplies he bought that morning into the cold storage unit. He switched over to a truck to go and pick up the heavy steel cages. While at the factory, he noticed they also had rolls of razor wire available. He decided to grab some wire mesh and several lengths of seamless steel tubing as well. After that, he stopped by a hardware store and purchased 5,000 impact nails, just to be safe. These things are normally used to install ceiling structures, but he knew they could be quite useful with a small modification. Returning to the cold storage unit, we see that his father-in-law and the others had also made it back. They had spent the day buying bedding, towels, and various linens to stock up their supplies. Back at the unit, the group unloaded a mountain of bedding, towels, toilet paper, feminine hygiene products, and all sorts of cleaning supplies. The MPV was packed so tightly it was practically bursting at the seams. While the women began the long task of sorting and storing everything, he and his father-in-law grabbed their welding torches. They immediately set to work welding the steel plates onto the heavy iron cages. The 2 of them worked until 9 at night, and by then, the project was nearly finished. They covered the exterior walls of the cages with stainless steel strips, leaving exactly 5 centimeters of space between each one. This design wasn't just for defense, it also allowed whoever was inside to keep a close eye on their surroundings. On the outside, the entire structure was wrapped in razor wire, with the sharp edges facing outward, naturally. The entrance was positioned at the very top, located right beneath the skylight for easy access. Once a person climbs inside, they simply pull the lid shut behind them. At that point, 4 heavy stainless steel bolts drop into place by gravity, locking the lid tight. From the outside, it is absolutely impossible to open, which is exactly the point. The base of the cage was fitted with 12 swivel wheels, each equipped with an elastic connection. This not only makes the massive thing easier to move, but it also helps distribute the cage's significant weight. And perhaps out of a bit of macabre personal taste, he decided to paint both cages a matte black. Now, all that remains is to wait for the 27th to finally assemble them. After a long day of preparation, they all returned to his father-in-law's house to share a quiet dinner. His sister-in-law handed him a detailed list, explaining that their current medical reserves were ready for review. The way they were storing everything was also a problem, or so she explained with a rather serious expression. She reminded him that when he sent her sister to pick her up, they had only purchased the most common medications. But they were missing essentials like anti-inflammatories, stomach medicine, povidone iodine, medical-grade disinfectant, saline solution, and gauze. The list went on to include adhesive tape, absorbent cotton, cotton swabs, medical dressings, and other similar supplies. He realized they didn't have nearly enough, and the sudden weight of that realization made him break into a cold sweat. Her list even included 2 refrigerators, a pressure cooker, and a water distiller. Quite the specific shopping trip. He understood using the pot for sterilization, but he couldn't quite grasp why they would possibly need 2 more refrigerators. After all, we see that they had already brought an entire cold storage unit into the mix. She patiently explained that every medication requires a different storage temperature to remain effective. Furthermore, it was vital to avoid the temperature fluctuations that happen when a fridge is opened and closed all day. That is why having 2 separate units was the better option, a point she made with remarkable patience. And it didn't stop there. They also needed to store common vaccines and injections, like those for rabies and tetanus. At this point, he simply gave in, deciding that if they were going to do this, they might as well do it right. He told her to get a large chest freezer instead of a standard upright model. They didn't need another vertical refrigerator, as they already had 2 of those at the house. Using one of those would suffice, along with 10 kilograms of cotton, a kilogram of gauze, and 20 sets of disposable gas masks. These masks were items they intended to keep with them at all times, just in case. He also added 12 motorized breathing units equipped with fans and specialized filters to the order. These would stay in the car, alongside 4 level 3 hazmat suits and 5 kilograms of penicillin. Get a container, he instructed, adding that they needed a kilogram of every vitamin from A to E, leaving absolutely nothing out. It was in that moment he realized he had no idea how cheap these were. A full kilogram of vitamins only cost about 40 yuan. The sun rose on a new day. It was now the 27th of June. After 6 days of intense preparation, we can finally say that our work has entered its very last phase. Over the past 5 days, we see that they have completed a series of complex and truly grueling operations. They successfully built a shelter, and now, he decided it was time to give us a brief summary of their progress. The plan was divided into 4 main categories: clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. First, the clothing. Besides moving all their current clothes to the shelter, they also stored a year's worth of spare undergarments for everyone. To face potential extreme weather, they prepared several sets of Korean-style clothing suitable for the Arctic. They prepared high-level protective suits for both winter and summer, along with lightweight outfits designed to repel mosquitoes and insects. He even went as far as modifying down-filled clothing for the pets. These were meant to serve as protective suits for the dog and the cat, a touch of luxury in the apocalypse, perhaps. Second, the food. They didn't just store 78 cubic meters of frozen goods, including pre-made meal kits and portions of chicken, duck, beef, lamb, pork, and fish. They also stockpiled 110 cubic meters of room-temperature provisions, which included 50 bags of rice, 30 bags of mixed grains, 15 bags of flour, 10 barrels of soybean oil, and 50 kilograms of apples. There were 15 kilos of various seasonings, all kinds of dried noodles, and similar products, enough for the humans and the pets alike. They even established a 150 square meter hydroponic garden, alongside a functional chicken coop. Of course, he made sure there was also plenty of specialized food for the pets. They even managed to accumulate 750 kilos of biodegradable cat litter. Before we dive into the details of the shelter, we must first discuss the matter of transportation. They set to work modifying the Bioaddy chain and the Tenside 9. The goal was to convert them into true survival vehicles, and this modification brought an unexpected benefit. We see that they managed to create extra storage space between the bodywork and the roll cage. In this clever little space, they can now store an additional 120 liters of gasoline. His father-in-law used seamless pipes and a one-way valve to connect the main gas tank directly to the canisters. Now, they can refill the tank using the fuel from the canisters without even stepping out of the car. With this setup, they ensured the range of both vehicles exceeds 3,000 kilometers, quite an impressive feat. Starting tomorrow, these 2 vehicles will serve as their escape plan should the shelter ever become unsafe. Furthermore, each car is designed to serve as a complete backup for the other. Therefore, they also stocked the vehicles with 6 sets of outdoor protective suits and active respirators per car. They included a 60-liter water tank with a UV sterilizer, 2 first aid kits, and 3 blankets. There are 2 sets of spare clothes for every person and emergency rations enough to feed 60 people. On the roof of the vehicle, a similar amount of provisions is kept, safely secured inside the cage. Inside that cage, there are also 120 liters of gasoline, a sapper shovel, and various other tools. The vehicles are parked on the first floor, hidden behind a false wall built with light steel profiles and drywall. Finally, we come to the shelter, the project into which they have invested the very best of their efforts. And, to be perfectly honest, it is the part that has cost them the most grueling labor. We look at the first and second floors of the refrigerated warehouse. At first glance, they still look like a messy, unfinished construction site. But we see that any piece of street art that might give them away has been moved up to the fourth floor. To any stranger looking in from the outside, this place simply looks like a long-abandoned site with nothing of value. This applies to the first, second, third, and fifth floors. All the water and electricity conduits leading to the fourth floor have been sealed and filled with a large amount of sealant. They used a viscous leak sealing material mixed with a foaming agent for this task. Eventually, this mixture will harden into a solid mass. It becomes similar to a sponge, which not only blocks the path but also absorbs vibrations and sound. The third and fifth floors remain entirely empty. The goal is for any intruder, unlikely as that may be, to mistakenly believe the building holds neither supplies nor people. The elevators in the Banton building don't even show that a fourth floor exists anymore. Once the stairs are destroyed, the fourth floor will be completely hidden from view. The building's cold storage area was divided into 4 parts, and the living quarters are wrapped in thick, soundproof walls. Even if the noise inside reaches 90 decibels, absolutely nothing can be heard from the outside. However, this efficiency actually led to a bit of a disagreement. With such excellent insulation, was it really necessary to limit the volume within the living area? After some discussion, the family finally reached an agreement. To maintain a life of quiet discretion, the storage area is located just outside the living zone. 40 pallets divide the space like a giant chessboard. By using a coding system and control boards like those in modern restaurants, they make finding supplies quick and easy. Finally, we find the waste processing area tucked away in a corner of the fourth floor. It includes both the bathroom and the waste treatment zone. This area handles everything from sewage treatment to the management of solid waste. A specially built, soundproofed operations room converts solid waste into bricks that are stacked in the trash pile under intense ultraviolet light and a high concentration of ozone. Finally, we come to the cultivation area. It includes hydroponic tanks and even a chicken coop. This will be our only source of fresh vegetables and meat in the future. As for appliances, besides the refrigerator we already planned, there is a washing machine, TV, rice cooker, steam oven, dishwasher, electric blanket, heater, water purifier, kettle, and air fryer, and we even added an electric pressure cooker. Of course, we also have the 2 small household drones and that maintenance drone. All of the building's original water and electricity systems have been completely disconnected. The original power system for the elevator was destroyed as well. Key components of the large water purification equipment on the first floor, like the circuit boards, the pump, the tank, and the valves, have been removed, creating the illusion that these conventional parts were stolen by some random thief. They even went so far as to cut and pull out the cables. But the well that the building's original owners secretly drilled was carefully hidden away. As for the staircase surface, those power-generating crystals that looked like a simple glass wall were also secured for our use. So, in reality, the building has more than enough water and electricity to go around. Lying in bed, he reviews his preparations for tomorrow over and over again in his mind. Deep down, he knows it doesn't matter how well prepared he might be. He feels a sudden surge of peace, with neither fear nor panic. Taking a deep breath, he gets up to finish the final details. The time has come for them to face this apocalypse together. He rose at 6 in the morning and began disconnecting every single appliance in the house, one by one. By 7, the entire family had finished their final breakfast in the old home. The day before, he had told his mother they were going on a trip today, a small white lie for now. His mother already had her things packed and ready to go when his father-in-law arrived to pick her up. They would head to the shelter first, and by 9, the moving crew had arrived at the house. They began moving the appliances and the various supplies his mother had packed away under his direction. He had already parked the truck as close to the house as possible the previous evening. The workers were only responsible for loading the items and securing them onto the pallets exactly as they were told. At precisely 12 minutes past 10, the move was finally complete. He locked the door for the last time, paid the workers, and everyone went their separate ways. It was now 11:48. Taking the wheel of the truck, he headed toward the highway. He took the long way on purpose, driving halfway across the city just to be certain he wasn't followed. Eventually, he brought the truck to the cold storage warehouse. The guard at the entrance of the industrial complex was the very same man he remembered from before. The man was heading into the city, and he wondered if, just like in his memories, the guard would return as a zombie. By 12:20, and with the help of a forklift, the unloading process was finished in record time. He went to find his mother, and with the old woman by his side, they prepared for the next step. Finally, he drove the truck to another warehouse located some 12 kilometers away. He looked at his mother, feeling the weight of his secrets, and started to speak, but she simply silenced him. She told him she understood perfectly why he had kept the truth hidden from her for so long. Now, however, the time had finally come for him to warn the rest of the world. He knew that holding a press conference right here would inevitably reveal the location of their sanctuary. With a quick gesture, he signaled to his father-in-law to bring the car around immediately. His plan was simple. The moment they sounded the alarm, they would make their final escape. At this point, that vehicle was the only family car they had left that was still capable of leaving. Half an hour later, his mother-in-law finished her call and climbed into the car in heavy silence. We see them racing back at full speed as videos of zombies attacking people had already begun flooding TikTok. They had to hurry. Every second counted if they were to return and seal the shelter in time. They managed to cover the 12-kilometer distance in less than 10 frantic minutes. His mother-in-law and his wife were waiting anxiously by the ground-floor elevator entrance. As he backed the car into the hidden parking area, the iron cage remained suspended in the air above. Once the false wall was installed, they would park the forklift right at the ground-floor elevator entrance. The plan was to remove the battery and circuit board, effectively freezing the elevator on the top floor. He intended to slide down the pipe to the car and secure the cage firmly to the chassis. By the time his father-in-law managed to pull him back up, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. The city center had been transformed into a literal hell on earth in just a few hours. There were no longer any living souls left wandering the streets, only the echoes of what used to be. Only zombies remained, prowling the ruins, and he knew he couldn't afford a single moment of rest. He brought out the ammonium nitrate and the detonators from the 5th floor. With great care, he placed them one by one into the holes they had drilled into the stairs and landings. He then connected the wires to a total of 220 cartridges. It was already 5 in the evening, a fact he confirmed with his wife, who was watching the monitors. Seeing no zombies nearby for the moment, he finally pressed the detonator. Through the thick layers of soundproofing material, the sound of the explosion wasn't actually that loud. It sounded a bit like someone knocking at the door, though the roar of the collapsing staircase was another matter entirely. Boom. We see the collapse unfold through the monitor on the top floor of the stairwell. Essentially, they had achieved their objective, and quite efficiently too. The only real problem now was the overwhelming amount of smoke and dust. Another half hour passed, and after a round of inspections, he found the defenses were holding perfectly. The water and electricity were also working without any issues. Now, at last, they could officially consider themselves settled in. By the time they finished with everything, it was already time for dinner. It was a moment to celebrate the fact that the entire family had successfully relocated. Since the fresh vegetables wouldn't last many days, they decided to treat themselves to a feast. They even brought out their prized stash of Coca-Cola for the occasion. Meanwhile, the television continued to broadcast the latest breaking news. The presenter, struggling to maintain his composure, admitted there was little left to be done. The president of the Health Commission, Juan Carlos Sanchez, began reading the official statement. For the moment, the cause and origin of the disease remain completely unknown. All residents are being asked to remain in their homes and wait for rescue. The country will not abandon anyone, or so the official promise went. At the same time, we see a message arrive on the phone from the neighborhood committee. They were attempting to conduct a census of the inhabitants in every house. He decided not to respond. After all, they weren't in that residential area anymore and didn't need supplies. Since the Health Commission admitted there was nothing to be done, he figured they could respond later if evacuation news arrived. There was no rush, and after dinner, his mother and mother-in-law went to sleep, exhausted from the long day. He and his father-in-law had a brief discussion, but in the end, it was his turn to take the first watch. Earlier that morning, his father-in-law had successfully cut the signal from the security booth's cameras. He redirected the entire video feed straight to their new living quarters. The bathroom they had originally planned for the space had been moved elsewhere. Now, the small room functions as a dedicated monitoring station for the factory's internal and external cameras. Every single camera from the shelter, both inside and out, is now centralized right here. 8 screens come together to form a small, glowing wall of monitors. They don't have any audio, of course, but they can see absolutely everything. On the screens, the main street appears empty, utterly and completely deserted. The solar-powered streetlights flicker on automatically as the darkness settles in. With the main street sitting right on the edge of the industrial zone, the lack of people or cars was hardly surprising. This place sits at the very edge of the industrial district, far from the chaos of the city. Behind them, there is nothing but open farmland stretching into the distance. It had been an unusually hot year, so the wheat ripened early and the harvest was already complete. The nearest residential complex is about 3 kilometers away, newly built relocation housing for local farmers. He had passed by that area just a few days ago, observing the quiet streets. He recalled hearing that the official opening ceremony for the main road and the houses was set for June 30th. Because of that, no one lives here yet. Besides, this location isn't exactly a major thoroughfare. It's nowhere near the highway or any significant route, so visitors are a rare sight indeed. And now, even less so. He spent his time watching the monitors and checking the latest news updates. As expected, the reports confirmed that the virus, with its epicenter in the neighboring provincial capital, was spreading rapidly. The military and the police had already been mobilized to deal with the growing threat. Just like in the trial version, the army found they had no effective solution for a virus that propagated this fast. At least, not for the time being. The soldiers didn't yet have the heart to open fire on their own people. He stayed awake like that until dawn, when his sister-in-law finally arrived to relieve him. True to the trial version, not a single person or car appeared on the monitors, so he headed off to sleep. If his memory served him, the old man who guarded the entrance would soon be arriving at the police station. He would be there shortly after 10, and on his way, he would encounter a zombie child who would bite him. Upon reaching the complex, he would meet our protagonist just as his shift ended, transforming while chatting with the workers. In that grim future, he and the workers would be forced to kill the old man together. After that, he would have to rush back to the city as quickly as possible. The city, after enduring 24 hours of relentless zombie attacks, would be an absolute disaster. In that dark timeline, he would find his mother's body lying near the bite hall. And later, upon reaching his father-in-law's house, he would find himself unable to enter. On the way to his own home, he would risk everything to break into Chunpei's warehouse. He would grab whatever food he could find and rush back to reunite with his wife. Eventually, driven by the lack of supplies, they would be forced to risk leaving the house again. He shakes his head, trying to discard those chaotic and haunting thoughts. He sets his phone alarm for 10 o'clock and falls asleep almost instantly. This is Zhang Wan, and he is already living in a world on the brink of collapse. But we have to wonder, can anyone truly say how severe this disaster has become? He woke up just a few minutes before 10. For a while, he simply stayed in bed, scrolling through his phone. When the alarm finally rang, he got up to brush his teeth and wash his face. To save water, the family had switched to using edible pet toothpaste. It's quite practical, to be honest, though the taste is rather difficult to describe. He went to the living room, where his mother-in-law brought him some preserved egg and pork congee. He sat down and began to devour it, but then he remembered the organic waste from yesterday. There weren't many leftovers, as they had finished almost everything that morning. His mother-in-law smiled and asked him if he meant the organic trash. It was only a few vegetable leaves and scraps of that nature. They had given it all to the dog, along with whatever remained from breakfast. She mentioned that the waste disposal unit he'd bought for the neighborhood wasn't really necessary anymore. Gobao had eaten everything, and to be honest, she hadn't imagined the dog would be so useful for that. It seemed they might even be able to save a little on his actual dog food. The plan was simple: give him fewer kibbles and cut out his treats entirely. She decided to keep those for herself to snack on, noting that the silly dog hadn't even noticed. In fact, the poor creature was still waiting there, hoping for just one more bite. Zhang Wan finished his congee, scraping the bowl with a silicone spoon to ensure not a single drop was wasted. Since there was no large dishwasher in this part of the neighborhood, he took the opportunity to look around. Despite the luxury of last night's dinner, they hadn't even managed to fill half of the dishwasher. Not bad at all, he thought, as he headed to the monitoring station just as the main gate was opening. The old man had returned, riding his electric scooter and steering with only one hand. His other hand dangled at his side, shaking every now and then in a rather unsettling way. It was clear he had been bitten, and we watch as he parks his scooter and approaches the guard shack. He opened the door, stepped inside, and pulled it shut behind him. A moment later, the outdoor unit of the air conditioner hummed to life. A few more minutes passed in silence, until suddenly, the door to the guard shack swung open again. The old man stumbled out, took 2 shaky steps, and collapsed heavily onto the ground. His sister-in-law, visibly trembling, gripped his clothes and asked if the man was dead. He shifted slightly to free his shirt and told her that yes, he was dead, but not entirely. He pointed to the screen, where the old man's legs kicked twice before he suddenly rolled over. He rose from the ground by arching his back backward, a movement that a normal person simply couldn't do. The creature straightened itself up little by little, and we see the transformation is complete. Zooming in on the image, his skin had turned a sickly grayish tone, with his veins showing through as a deep, dark black. His sister-in-law began to observe the zombie's behavior with great interest while he returned to the living room. He put on his headphones and sat down to watch a series with his wife, a perfectly normal evening, all things considered. On the 3rd day of the outbreak, we returned to the matter of the sewage tank. It had already surpassed 10%. Of the 12 20-liter Blackwater tanks, 3 were already full. He notified the whole family, and they decided it was time to carry out the first waste disposal. Starting with the toilet, he put on his mask and dragged the Blackwater tank out. To prevent drain odors from leaking, he had installed 3 siphons, 2 gravity check valves, and 1 with a mechanical door. They also covered the drain outlet with 3 lids made from 5mm stainless steel plates. Between these layers, they placed a high-resistance rubber seal for extra protection. As he emptied the tank, he carefully observed how the solids had decomposed and, more importantly, the intensity of the smell. This was because they had added decomposition agents and deodorants to the first 3 Blackwater tanks. They used doses of double, 1.5, and 1.25 times the normal amount, respectively. After comparing the results of the 3 tanks, they decided that from now on, they would stick with the 1.5 dose. Next up was the greywater tank, which presented its own set of challenges. We see they have 2 storage tanks, both with a capacity of 5 tons. Both units have ultraviolet light and ozone disinfection equipment installed to keep things sanitary. One of them functions as the clean water tank, which, as we can imagine, is their most precious resource. This tank stores the water we draw from the well. We always keep it full. If we use a ton, we pump another ton right back in. It's a rotation system, really. The other unit is the wastewater tank. The bottom 30% of that tank is reserved for sludge sedimentation. We made outlets at 10% and 50% of the tank's height for drainage. The water in the wastewater tank isn't just stored, it's also used to flush the drainage pipes. He released 100 kilos of wastewater to wash away the excrement. After that, he used another 10 kilos of clean water to rinse the pipes thoroughly. Once all of this was finished, he sealed the drainage pipe once again. As a first step, he washed and disinfected his hands before returning to the living quarters. His sister-in-law pointed at the lone zombie and noted that while they seem blind, they can sense light. They don't like the sun, so they hide in the shadows, which is a comforting thought, in a way. However, they are extremely sensitive to sound. They can follow the direction of a noise with unsettling precision. Their movement isn't very agile, but they are heavily affected by the temperature. In the heat, they become more agile. In the cold, not so much. As for their sense of smell, it's impossible to tell for now. He nodded. It was more or less exactly as he remembered it. Today, the internet was flooded with information about the infected and government announcements. On one hand, they encouraged everyone to stay indoors as much as possible and wait for rescue. On the other hand, they were officially authorizing the army to open fire on any infected individuals. According to the official version, the UN government claimed safe zones would be prioritized and the areas would be cleared. These safe zones were to be established in small towns and rural areas. The logic was simple. The population density is lower there, meaning fewer infected to deal with. In such places, a proper defense system could actually be established. He checked the community group and saw quite a few survivors, though most were already out of supplies. Some had already begun the desperate attempt to trade whatever they had for a bit of food. He felt a twinge of regret, wondering why he hadn't thought to point the security cameras outward to see the world. But there wasn't much to be done about that now. It was the 5th day of the outbreak. We see that the surroundings of the shelter remain largely unchanged. Everything was quiet, and everything was empty. Only that lone zombie continued its aimless wandering nearby. The most curious thing, however, was that the creature seemed entirely unwilling to duck or lower its head. The old man, before he turned, had closed the main gate he always used. But the pedestrian door was left ajar, and it happened to be exactly one head shorter than he was. Yet the stubborn thing refused to simply bend down to get out. To be honest, it was almost impressive. He would simply bump into it a few times, turn around, and walk away. Across the internet, a wave of negativity was beginning to spread like a second virus. And naturally, a few undesirable types were already starting to stir the pot and cause trouble. They posted comments suggesting that if one simply fled the country, everything would be fine. Everything was supposedly calm and wonderful, but almost instantly, citizens living abroad posted photos and videos to shut them up. Over there, the authorities were repeating themselves to the point of exhaustion, telling people not to go out, to stay quiet, and to wait for rescue. They also released official information regarding the creation of the very first safe zone. And while this generated plenty of hope and positive comments, Lin Jin and Gao Wuman suddenly made an appearance. As a result, the comment section turned back into a lively battlefield where everyone was desperate to have their say. "Quick, come here, there's a car," his wife told him over the communicator. We see that in their rotation, he and his father-in-law are responsible for the night shift. His wife and his sister, on the other hand, take the day shift. The day shift runs from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. These are 7-hour shifts, while the night shift only lasts for 5. At that moment, his wife was working the final shift of the day. He hurried into the monitoring room to see what was happening. And there on the screen, we see a white SUV approaching, wobbling unsteadily as it moved. It was quite obvious that the vehicle was struggling to make any forward progress. It reached the corner and came to a halt, and the driver stepped out to check the tires. It appeared that the front left tire was completely flat. The driver climbed back into the car and began driving toward our factory. From the look of things, he wanted to pull in here to hide and change the tire, which, to be honest, was a risky move. He quickly began searching the monitors to locate the zombie. He eventually found it at the far end of the factory grounds. Although it was still far away, the path between the creature and the main gate was a perfectly straight line. Now, we should note that the factory's sliding gate is equipped with an automatic license plate recognition system. He had set it up that way originally to make it easier for him to bring in supplies. The recognition function was still active, though at this point, it was merely recording data. This meant, essentially, that any car with a license plate could trigger the gate and enter. Just like that. And while they couldn't hear anything through the thick walls, the zombie's movements on the monitor told the story. It was obvious the creature had heard something, as it began to shuffle directly toward the gate. The driver turned right and parked not far from the entrance, watching as the gate slowly began to slide shut behind him. He stepped out, glanced cautiously from side to side, and started walking toward the guard booth. He took a couple of steps, paused, looked back inside the car, and then decided to return. It seemed there was someone else in the vehicle who prevented him from exploring any further. The driver then pulled a small canister out of the trunk. By the look of it, a rough guess. Really, it appeared to be some kind of emergency tire sealant. He knelt down by the front left tire and began to do his work, oblivious to the danger. Inside the monitoring room, he and his wife watched the screen, their nerves stretched thin. The zombie had already covered more than half the distance, and, suddenly, it appeared in the very same camera shot. The driver finally stood up and was saying something to the person still waiting in the car. When he suddenly turned and saw the zombie, it was only about 10 meters away from him. He scrambled into the car as best he could, stumbling over his own feet, started the engine, and threw it into reverse. He maneuvered back to the gate, waited for it to open, and sped away like a man possessed. As we watched the gate slide shut behind the car, my wife and I both let out a long sigh of relief. When he finally managed to catch his breath, he realized his hands were completely drenched in sweat. And although he had stopped recording for the driver's sake, he couldn't help but mutter a small complaint. If you were going to run away anyway, the least you could have done was take the zombies with you. Instead, they were left right there. It was now the 10th day of the outbreak. As one might expect in such a situation, the water and electricity were finally cut off. And the internet, amidst the never-ending digital cries for help, barely managed to hold on for another 20 hours. Only the solar streetlights remained, holding up the very last shred of modern civilization's dignity. Without the internet, they found themselves trapped in a bubble of total misinformation. All that was left was to pass the days watching the movies and series they had previously saved. The lack of communication with the outside world also made them grow much quieter among themselves. To keep their mental health from slipping, his sister-in-law volunteered to lead a daily exercise routine. They also established a strict internal rule to limit the amount of time they spent staring at the television. But, to everyone's surprise, his father-in-law managed to build a micron antenna so they could scan the frequencies. Even though the signal was terrible, to be honest, that's being generous, they could at least catch a few channels. The national channel was broadcasting non-stop official announcements to the nation. The Zen channel only showed emergency notifications, and the local channels in their own province had already gone dark. However, the channel from Zen City, in the neighboring province, was still broadcasting some actual news. He assumed this was because the neighboring province had a much higher concentration of military garrisons. They maintained better control there. Besides, it was a highly industrialized province, which certainly helped. Their industrial capacity and infrastructure are superior, so their power supply is naturally much more stable than ours. And just like that, our story enters its first truly critical stage. By critical, he didn't mean the general supplies or even the waste management. The real problem was that they had finally run out of fresh vegetables and meat. For the three of them, the younger ones, it wasn't such a terrible ordeal. But the three elders simply couldn't get used to the change. Even though he had prepared 14 different types and over 200 kilos of freeze-dried vegetables, in the end, they just don't have the same flavor as the fresh ones, which is to be expected. The same thing was happening with the frozen meat. The three elders lost their appetites noticeably, which was a worrying sign. On the 40th day of the outbreak, we see a presenter appear on the provincial channel for the very first time. Judging by the image, he seemed to be in a makeshift broadcasting studio. The green screen effect wasn't even stable, a small detail that spoke volumes about the situation. The good news was that the first safe zone in the province had finally been established. This safe zone is located in the southern mountains, in what used to be a military training base. Just as the outbreak began, there happened to be troops training right there. When the soldiers realized the scale of the disaster, they moved quickly to establish the safe zone. After chaotically repelling the first zombie attacks, the troops began to take the initiative, heading out to rescue a large number of civilians. They managed to advance up to 100 kilometers, reaching all the way to the provincial capital. It was then that the television staff and others were finally brought to the safety of the zone. On the news, they were advising citizens that, depending on their current supplies and the safety of their surroundings, they should decide for themselves whether to head for the safe zone or wait for rescue at home. They also provided several sets of instructions on how to defend oneself against the zombies. The family discussed it together. They had plenty of supplies, solid defenses, and a reliable escape plan. Deep down, he knew there was simply no need to risk everything by traveling to the safe zone. It was much better, and certainly much safer, to stay right there in the shelter. Suddenly, his wife raised a very practical question in the middle of their discussion. She pointed out that there probably weren't many people left who could still watch television like they could. Who exactly was this news for? At that, his father-in-law gave himself a sharp slap on the forehead. He muttered about getting old, realizing he had completely forgotten about the existence of the radio. The radio had surely been broadcasting information for a long time now. We see them all standing there, looking at one another, not quite knowing what to do next. There was nothing to say, really. It simply hadn't occurred to anyone to prepare a radio beforehand. His mother then pulled one of those Bluetooth speakers out of her bag, the kind people use for dancing in public squares. Unfortunately, the radio function on this particular device had broken down a long time ago. It only worked via Bluetooth, so he decided to take it apart to see exactly what was failing. His father-in-law produced a screwdriver and carefully opened up the outer casing of the device. He quickly spotted the problem. A capacitor had burned out, and it was a very common type of component. All he had to do was scavenge a replacement from some other small household appliance. And so, he promptly began taking apart another massager to get the part he needed. He found the capacitor, swapped it out, and by the time he finished the repair, night had already fallen. With the radio finally fixed, he began to slowly scan through the national stations. Surprisingly, there was a bit of everything: provincial, state, and even municipal broadcasts. Of course, the content was practically the same across all of them. They announced that there were safe zones in such and such locations. Citizens were told to head toward them, depending on their specific circumstances. As it turned out, his father-in-law's repair job was surprisingly effective. The device didn't just pick up the standard radio stations we might expect. It even managed to catch the TACAN signal from the local military airport. Suddenly, a new idea occurred to him. He searched his phone and found the channel of a ham radio operator from the north he had met once. The channel belonged to DP, a true radio enthusiast. He tried to tune it in, only to hear the sudden, jarring sound of a massive horde of zombies. The noise gave him quite a fright. The voice on the radio sounded muffled and consumed by panic. The man on the radio screamed that there were too many zombies, that they were like a rising tide. There was no end to them in sight, and this tide of the lost was coming from the north. He remembered that DP lived in the north, more than 1,300 kilometers away. If there were people even further north than him, it could only mean they were coming from abroad. His sister-in-law approached, noting that zombies are less active in cold temperatures, which is why they migrate south. This, she explained, proves they still possess some very primitive biological characteristics. And here we encounter a chilling question. Could these zombies actually be capable of reproducing? His wife, ever the creative thinker, had come up with yet another one of her wild theories. He took a moment to consider it before gently pulling her back into the room. From his collection of study materials, he pulled out a film to illustrate a point. The look on his wife's face shifted instantly to one of pure disgust. To be perfectly honest, the footage made him feel a bit nauseous as well. They returned to the living room, where his sister-in-law was waiting to show them a document. According to the notes, the woman had moved at the same pace as the zombie below. She had covered a distance of 200 meters in exactly 3 minutes. That averages out to approximately 4 kilometers per hour. It is a pace slightly slower than that of an average person. This is largely because, during the day, they are exposed to the direct heat of the sun. They fear the sunlight, which limits their walking time to a maximum of 8 hours a day. To cover 1,300 kilometers at that rate, it would take them about 40 days. And that is assuming they must cross cities, rivers, and ravines while constantly finding places to hide from the light. It no longer surprised him that he hadn't seen any zombies on the test server. Thanks to the heavy downpour a few days ago, the photovoltaic glass panels were now sparkling clean. Consequently, the energy generation over the last few days had been absurdly high. They were pulling in more than 80 kilowatt hours every single day. Furthermore, not a single sound had leaked out from their sanctuary over the past month. We see that they have finally lifted the noise restrictions and returned to normal life, simply because they have electricity to spare. The first harvest of hydroponic vegetables was a complete success, and the elders' lack of appetite has finally been relieved. However, the biggest surprise of all came from Yuden's chickens. To be perfectly honest, he had acted on a bit of a whim when he bought an entire cage of them. In total, there were 16 of them, 15 hens, and one very busy rooster. His original plan, of course, was to use them as a supplement for fresh meat. Who could have imagined that they would actually start laying eggs so soon? But this unexpected bounty brought an immediate problem along with it. The food consumption increased, and then it increased even more. After all, they hadn't exactly planned on stocking up on specialized chicken feed, nor had they set aside any of their basic grains for the birds. After 5 days of careful observation, we reach a difficult conclusion. If they keep all 16 chickens just for the eggs, their grain reserves would decrease by the equivalent of an entire month. If they hatch chicks once every 6 months to replace the layers, their survival timeline would be cut short by 3 months. Following a democratic vote, it was finally decided that he would keep only 9 of the 15 hens, and they would only be allowed to hatch new chicks once every 9 months. We reached day 55 of the outbreak, the very day he had lost contact with his in-laws in his past life. Our story remembers that their houses were once facing each other, separated only by the river. On the test server, they could still use flashlight signals to let each other know they were safe. Until one day, there was no response. But now, the entire family is safely gathered together in the shelter. Although we cannot see the sunlight, the entire family is finally safe and sound, so today we organize a grand feast. It was a time to celebrate, complete with the drinks and spirits they had carefully hoarded for a moment just like this. They even had desserts and ice pops, a rare luxury in these times, to be sure. After carefully evaluating safety and fire hazards, he and his father-in-law worked together to grill skewers and lamb ribs. They were in the middle of their meal when the usual television broadcast flickered, replaced by a news studio and an emergency bulletin. Several zombie hordes coming from the north had already managed to overwhelm multiple locations. Small safe zones and settlements in the northern provinces were devastated, resulting in a massive number of new infections. The horde had grown even stronger than before, a terrifying thought for anyone watching. Currently, the mass continues to advance southward at a steady speed of 3 to 5 kilometers per hour. Everyone stopped eating immediately. The festive mood had vanished in an instant. We see in the footage how the zombies, using their sheer numbers, began to pile up against the edges of the safe zones. Bit by bit, they stacked themselves until they reached the top of the walls, finally climbing over to begin the massacre. It was now the 70th day since the initial outbreak. After witnessing the horde's new method of attack, he and his father-in-law meticulously inspected their entire defense system. They focused on the platform where the destroyed stairs used to be, hoping to prevent the zombies from stacking high enough to climb up. He used the remaining cement to give the platform a steep incline. This way, the zombies would find it impossible to keep their footing. A simple solution, but a necessary one. Today also brought a bit of good news. The first batch of quail eggs has finally hatched. This means their plan for sustainable meat has taken a significant step forward. On day 90 of the outbreak, news reports indicate the vanguard of the Great Southern Horde halted its advance 10 days ago due to rising temperatures. However, more and more zombies continue to gather, swelling the ranks of the main group. The horde is currently settled to the north, over 400 kilometers away, on the banks of the Great Ebby River. Over the last few months, we see that more safe zones have begun appearing all over the place. The closest one to our family is located only 50 kilometers away. And yet, despite their efforts to build higher walls, one can't help but fear they won't last long against the horde. After 3 months of constant use, the bottom of the sewage tank had accumulated a considerable amount of solid waste. Since it happens to be raining today, they decide to use the weather as cover to completely drain the tank. The accumulated waste would also be extracted through the drainage outlet at the very bottom. Because they now have an excess of electricity, a rare luxury, indeed, they brought out all the heaters. The plan was to dry out all the moisture, compress the waste into blocks, and stack them in the solid waste area. The entire family put on their protective suits and respirators to prepare for the task. His wife stayed behind to keep a close watch on the monitors, the dog, and the cats. The rest of the group headed down to the tank to begin the work. First, they carefully emptied the black water tank. After that, they used the upper drainage outlet of the sewage tank to give it a quick rinse. Once they had disinfected and soaked the black water tank 8 times, they opened the lower outlet to start emptying it. This was the moment of greatest tension, so they proceeded very slowly. It took them approximately 1 hour to drain all the water completely. He checked in with his wife, who reported that the zombies were merely taking shelter from the rain at the main entrance. The drainage outlet at the bottom of the tank, however, proved to be a bit more complicated. On one hand, the sediment is thick and the height is low, meaning it can't be connected directly to the main drainage pipe. On the other, we fear that too many solids might clog the plumbing, so this particular drain outlet remains open. We see them double-check that the 2 doors separating the drainage zone from the living area are tightly sealed. He and his father-in-law pushed a cart carrying a 150-liter stainless steel tank. His mother-in-law, meanwhile, took her position to control the drainage valve. His mother was in charge of catching any stray drips with a small basin once the tank was full. His sister-in-law was given the task of operating the compressor. By then, they had already turned off the ozone generator to prepare for the next step. Everything was ready, and so, the valve was opened. Out came a black, viscous substance, looking uncomfortably like half-melted chocolate. Even though his respirator was working at full capacity, it was impossible to completely block out that stench. Deciding it was better to bring another cart, he and his father-in-law tightly closed the valve. They hauled the heavy cart toward the solid waste treatment room and switched off the ultraviolet lamp. After confirming the ozone levels wouldn't hinder their work, they opened the door and entered the compression cubicle. Inside the channel of the solid waste compactor, they carefully laid down several layers of fiber cloth. They intentionally placed a large tub under the machine to catch the dirty water that would be squeezed out. Scoop by scoop, he and his father-in-law began to remove the sticky sludge. They poured it into the compression channel, filling it to about 80% capacity. They covered it with more fiber cloth, started the motor, and gradually moved the compression plate into position. The compression began, though they kept the speed slow and the pressure gentle to avoid tearing the cloth. Normally, compressing the waste takes about 20 seconds, but they took their time, stretching the process to 2 minutes. Inside the channel of the waste compactor, the sludge was transformed into a flat plate, or a sheet, one might say. If they were to write something on it, and it were found in a few hundred years, it would count as a historical document, wouldn't it? His father-in-law's laughter could be heard echoing through the filters of his respirator. It sounded a bit muffled, and naturally, he couldn't help but laugh along too. Imagine if people started studying what that plate was actually made of. Don't you think they would vomit on the spot? And then, of course, they would be accused of destroying a precious cultural relic. Between the laughter and the jokes, we see them stacking the sludge plates one by one. Once they finished compressing everything, they brought in 2 electric heaters to finish the job. Taking advantage of the fact that they had plenty of electricity, they hurried to dry them all out. Otherwise, the plates would continue to reek and would remain a serious biological hazard. On the 150th day after the outbreak, the temperature finally began to drop. This decline in temperature wasn't exactly a surprise to anyone. After all this time, the government had already restored some social functions in the safe zones, including the weather forecast. which was, interestingly enough, one of the very first public services to be reinstated. To be honest, inside the shelter, the change in temperature was barely even noticeable. After all, thermal insulation works just as well for the cold as it does for the heat. The cultivation area remained warm and humid, bathed in an abundance of artificial light. The hydroponic plants were growing luxuriantly, especially the fast-growing ones like lettuce and chives. By this point, they had already managed to harvest their crops several times. And just when we were quite content, tending to our crops and raising chickens, someone suddenly shouted through the earpiece, "There's trouble, come quickly." Back in the main room, we could hear Tibby's voice crackling over the radio. With a voice full of panic, he was saying, "They're back." And there were even more of them than last time. They were all foreigners, and there were so many that they no longer fit in the streets. We spent the following week listening to Master Tibby's channel. He described the massive size of the zombie nest, and we listened as he worried about not being able to go out for food. We heard him calculating exactly how much longer the food he had at home would last. Meanwhile, on the television, the government announced they would destroy the bridges with airstrikes to cut off the horde's migration route to the south. They claimed that once the horde concentrated on the north bank of the river, they would annihilate them. Over the next 50 days, from the far north of the country down to the south, we heard news every few days of which bridge had been destroyed, or reports of which specific zombie horde had been eliminated. It was now day 220 of the outbreak, and the temperature was approaching 0 degrees. In response, they checked all the water pipes and heating equipment to prevent them from freezing and bursting. They also prepared to leave the water running continuously, a necessary precaution, of course. And as for our hydroponic crops, they harvested everything they possibly could. The plants that simply weren't going to survive the cold were all gathered together. They installed a circulation pump to create a constant flow of water. By now, the zombie horde had already moved. They had reached the center of the country, where the network of rivers is incredibly dense. The rivers divide the horde into smaller pieces, which reduces their size and limits their range of movement. The low temperatures also play their part, making the zombies move much slower than before. The combination of all these conditions makes this place the perfect environment to finally eliminate them. We see that the north of our country is now covered in snow, with the cities completely closed off. The few zombies that remained scattered and didn't migrate south are simply no match for the army. So, in practice, one could say that for the north, the apocalypse has already come to an end. Reconstruction has already begun, while the zombies in the south continue their migration because the country lacks the capacity to eliminate them all. The brief opportunity for the zombies to leave the country was quickly seized by our leaders. They destroyed the bridges to prevent the zombies from continuing their path toward Nanjing, and, of course, to cut off any possible route for them to return to the north. Naturally, the borders of our country aren't just made of rivers. Because of that, some of the destroyed bridges are south of the border, and the Chinese government didn't oppose it. If there is anything left to be said, it's through the words of Zhang Wan. He could say with pride that of all the preparations he made for this apocalypse, not a single one was unnecessary. By day 435 after the outbreak, order in the north and south has become practically stable. It can be said with certainty that the zombies there have been eliminated. Those in the central region are also being liquidated, little by little, as the cleanup continues. Deep down, they felt that it wouldn't be long now before they were finally rescued. We turn to today's news regarding our own area, Vichy. In the last 100 days, unfortunately, no other survivors have been found, nor have any new distress signals been received. Therefore, to end the zombie horde once and for all, the government has decided that in 10 days they will drop bait in the rivers near Vichy. The goal is to concentrate the local zombies in Vichy and eliminate them quickly with a nuclear weapon. The nuclear weapon they plan to use is small, powerful, and designed with low residual radiation. It was developed independently by our country's scientists, who hold all the intellectual property rights. We see them staring at one another, absolutely stunned by the news. A concentrated cleanup in Vichy using a nuclear bomb. It was a lot to take in. A weapon? He realized with a jolt that such a thing would blow them all to pieces. He couldn't believe it. It seemed that for the crime of hiding well, they were being rewarded with a nuclear strike. He looked around, wondering if this place could even withstand a nuclear blast, which, let's be honest, was highly unlikely. He snapped out of his thoughts and told the others to pack their things. They had to prepare to leave immediately. The 2 cars are always kept ready, even though they haven't been used in over a year. But according to the gauges, they are still in perfect working condition. He sat down with his father-in-law to discuss their next move, and they decided that they couldn't just leave without a proper plan. First, if they were to leave, the shelter had to remain completely sealed. That way, in case reconstruction ever began, they might be able to recover some of their belongings. Second, before departing, they needed to eat well to ensure they had enough strength and energy. They had to be ready to face any unforeseen obstacles on the road ahead. And third, their new objective was to head toward a designated safe zone. Even though they have a rationing system in place over there, the supplies we bring along won't be confiscated, they will remain ours. Fourth, although the currency is still in circulation, cash is very difficult to contribute. We need something of value for bartering, so we must take all the seeds we haven't planted yet, all the quails, and all the eggs, boiled of course. One car will carry a portion of the basic food supplies. Also a bit of every type of bean to be used as seeds later on. The explosives they had made earlier were divided into 200-gram packages. They allocated 2 kilograms per car for personal defense. Canned vegetables in bags, along with any other food items not yet packed. A combination of various hot sauces, totaling 120 kilograms, was placed in the cage outside the car. Each person will take 3 extra changes of clothes and 10 sets of underwear and socks. And finally, the battery packs. They decided to consider all the electrical appliances as lost. What truly matters are the supplies for our future life. Before leaving, we see that they first have to deal with that zombie inside the complex. If they didn't, it was going to seriously hinder their preparations. The solution they came up with was actually quite simple. They put a chicken in the elevator to lure it, waited for it to enter, closed the door, and then cut the power. It worked perfectly. The flapping chicken attracted the zombie immediately. As soon as the zombie stepped into the elevator, they pressed the button for the 4th floor to close the doors. The moment the elevator began its ascent, they cut the power immediately, trapping it inside. The next thing to be heard, rather unfortunately for the bird, was the terrifying screech of the chicken. On the monitor, we see the zombie devour the chicken before it began aimlessly pacing around the small space. To be absolutely certain the area was clear, they released 3 more chickens outside as a test. After the birds wandered the complex for a full day and night, alive and well, they finally put on their protective suits. They headed down to the 1st floor using the other elevator and began the work of removing the false wall. Just as they finished, the day arrived when the government would deploy decoys to lure the zombies out of the city. We see a military drone on the monitors, flying low and slow, occasionally dropping live animals to the ground. At other times, it blasted music at full volume to draw the undead in from every corner of the streets. While the horde was being lured toward the north, our group decided it was time to launch their own drone. High in the air, their device crossed paths with the military drone as it was returning to its base. On the 2nd day, during a shift change, the military drone dropped a package exactly where they had first met. They carefully retrieved it with their own drone and brought it back to the safety of the complex. After disinfecting the package several times, they found a military walkie-talkie and a letter tucked inside. The first part of the letter confirmed the evacuation time, the route, and the details of the meeting point. The second section focused on the mandatory quarantine and the strict disinfection requirements they would face. The third part detailed the safe zone, the protection of personal property, and how jobs were assigned under the rationing system. And finally, there was a list of supplies that were urgently needed within the safe zone itself. After reading through the letter, a brand new idea began to take shape in his mind. The plan was simple. Besides keeping their essentials, they could share the rest of their hoard with the government in exchange for special treatment. After all, in our family, only 3 people were fit to work, and they had 3 elderly members to look after. In a world governed by strict rationing, that was, to put it bluntly, not exactly a competitive advantage. After negotiating with the government, they agreed that all their electrical appliances, batteries, and car parts would remain theirs. The rest of the supplies would be split 50-50, provided the 3 elderly members were exempt from labor, while still receiving the same benefits and care as everyone else in the safe zone. Furthermore, the government promised to send troops specifically to pick them up, and, perhaps more importantly, to help them transport their massive mountain of supplies. We see them wait for 2 days, and on the 2nd day after the zombies were cleared, a convoy of vehicles appeared on the monitors. And there it was, the military flag, waving with a sense of glory and pride that they hadn't felt in a long time. In that moment, he finally realized that his long struggle to survive the apocalypse had come to a successful end.